My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and I work as a financial auditor. On what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, I walked into my own wedding reception to find my parents standing awkwardly near the kitchen doors. My new husband and his family had hijacked the VIP table. When I confronted him, his mother sneered that my parents looked too poor for their elite gathering, and my husband agreed. I did not cry. I did not run away. Instead, I walked straight to the center of the dance floor and grabbed the microphone to make an announcement that would ruin his life instantly. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever stood up against entitled people who tried to make you feel small. The crystal chandeliers of the historic estate cast a warm glow over the grand ballroom. I stood at the main entrance, smoothing the delicate fabric of my custom bridal gown, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. This was supposed to be the beautiful culmination of a 2-year relationship with Julian, a man who always presented himself as the sophisticated heir to an old money legacy. We had spent months planning every detail, but as my eyes swept across the crowded room, the joyful anticipation evaporated from my chest, replaced by an icy knot of dread. The VIP head table, specifically designed with 10 seats, meant strictly for the bridal party, and our immediate parents was completely full. And my parents, Marcus and Helene, were nowhere to be found at that table. I scanned the massive ballroom frantically. It took me a moment to spot them. My beautiful, hardworking parents, the people who had built a highly successful soul food diner from scratch to give me every opportunity in this world, were standing awkwardly near the swinging kitchen doors. My father was holding my mother's hand tightly. He looked uncomfortable in his perfectly tailored suit as waiters rushed past them with heavy trays of appetizers nearly bumping into their shoulders. They looked like outcasts at their own daughter's wedding. I marched toward the head table, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. Seated comfortably in the places of honor were Julian, his mother, Eleanor, his sister-in-law, Chloe, and several older white men I recognized as Julian's wealthy venture capital investors. My parents had been literally pushed aside and replaced by his business associates. I reached the table and leaned down next to Julian. "What exactly is going on here?" I asked, keeping my voice low but vibrating with restrained anger. "Where are my parents? Why are they standing by the kitchen doors?" Julian turned to me, his perfect practiced smile never wavering for the sake of the investors watching us. But his eyes were cold and calculating. He stood up tightly, gripping my upper arm, and pulled me close. "Do not make a scene, Maya," he whispered aggressively, his fingers digging into my skin. "My top investors are here tonight. I needed these premium seats to close a crucial financial deal. Your parents can sit anywhere. It is not a big deal." "Not a big deal," the words echoed in my head. Before I could formulate a response, Eleanor leaned across the table. She swirled the champagne in her glass, her gaze sweeping over me with undisguised contempt. "They look poor," Maya Eleanor sneered, making absolutely no effort to lower her voice. "We are trying to impress people of high society tonight. The smell of fried grease from their little soul food diner is going to ruin the aesthetic of this elite gathering." I stared at her in absolute shock. The mask of her refined, welcoming mother-in-law persona had been stripped away, revealing the ugly entitlement underneath. My parents had worked 14-hour shifts at that diner to pay for my college education, and this woman had the audacity to reduce their lifelong sacrifice to the smell of fried grease. Chloe, Julian's white sister-in-law, chimed in with a condescending smirk, adjusting her designer jewelry. "Just learn to blend in, sweetie." Chloe said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "You are marrying into a different world now. This is not the hood. You cannot expect us to cater to your lack of class." The sheer disrespect took my breath away. I slowly turned my head to look at Julian, waiting for him to defend my parents, waiting for him to defend me, the woman he had just vowed to protect. Instead, he gave a slight dismissive nod of agreement. "They are right, Maya," he muttered, loosening his grip slightly. "Just let it go, take a seat, and smile for the cameras. Do not ruin this night for me." In that fraction of a second, the entire illusion of my perfect marriage shattered into a million pieces. I realized I was never a bride to them. I was merely a prop, a token used to make their outdated family look progressive, while they blatantly disrespected the very blood running through my veins. They expected me to cry, to shrink back into the shadows, to swallow my pride and my family's dignity, just to keep the peace and appease their superiority complex. But they severely underestimated who they were dealing with. The tears of hurt that had threatened to fall were instantly vaporized by a burning, righteous fury. My expression turned ice cold. I ripped my arm out of Julian's grip with enough force to make him stumble backward into his chair. I did not scream. I did not curse. Without saying another word to him, his mother, or his sister-in-law, I turned my back on the table. I walked straight toward the center of the illuminated dance floor. The wedding MC was standing near the edge of the stage, reading over his notes for the evening's schedule. I marched directly up to him, snatched the heavy microphone right out of his hands, and shot a glaring look at the audio technician. "Cut the music," I demanded. The romantic background music scratched to a sudden, deafening halt. The sudden silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. Hundreds of guests turned their heads, their conversations dying out as they stared at the bride standing alone in the center of the room, gripping the microphone like a weapon ready to burn the entire evening to the ground. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, thick with a sudden suffocating tension. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me. I tightened my grip on the microphone, feeling the cool metal anchor my racing heart. I did not look at Julian. I did not look at his sneering mother or his condescending sister-in-law. My eyes found the only two people in this massive, opulent estate who actually mattered. Before we proceed with tonight's festivities, my voice echoed through the high ceiling, steady. I need to make a proper introduction. A wedding is about bringing families together, but it seems there was a severe oversight in tonight's seating arrangements. I pointed directly to the kitchen doors. The spotlight operator, sensing the shift in the program, swung the beam across the room, illuminating my parents. Marcus and Helene stood there, caught in the sudden glare, but my father straightened his posture instantly. He pulled my mother closer, wrapping a protective arm around her waist. "Those two people standing by the kitchen are my parents," I announced, making sure every syllable rang with absolute pride. They did not inherit a trust fund. They did not have the luxury of generational wealth handed down to them on a silver platter. They built their legacy with their own two hands. For 30 years, they ran a soul food diner on the South Side. They worked 14-hour shifts so that I could stand in rooms like this. They taught me the value of $1, the meaning of integrity, and what actual dignity looks like. I paused, letting those words sink into the minds of the wealthy investors and high society guests sitting at the tables. I saw a few of Julian's business partners exchange confused glances. "So it is absolutely fascinating to me." I continued, turning my gaze back to the center of the room, that the people who gave me everything were shoved into the shadows tonight, while people who have contributed absolutely nothing to my life took the seats of honor. I locked eyes with the head catering manager, a woman I had personally hired and paid. "Sharon," I called out over the speakers. The manager stepped forward from the shadows. "Cancel all food and beverage service to the main VIP table immediately. Clear their plates. Take back the champagne. If anyone sitting at that table wants a drink or a meal tonight, they can walk their entitled bodies back to the kitchen and ask the staff for leftovers, because they are officially cut off." The catering staff, loyal to the person who actually signed their paychecks, moved with military precision. Waiters swooped in on the VIP table. Chloe gasped in sheer outrage, staring at her empty fingers. That was all it took for the aristocratic mask to slip completely off Eleanor's face. The refined, wealthy matriarch vanished, replaced by a furious, red-faced woman who could not handle losing control. Eleanor slammed her hands down on the table, her chair screeching harshly against the hardwood floor as she leaped to her feet. "Are you completely insane?" Eleanor shrieked. Her voice was shrill enough to cut through the vast room without a microphone. "How dare you disrespect my family in front of our guests? My family paid for this entire wedding. We funded this extravagant party for you. You are nothing but an ungrateful gold digger trying to embarrass us." The ballroom erupted into shocked murmurs. Julian top investors leaned back in their chairs, clearly disturbed by the sudden chaotic outburst from a woman who was supposed to represent elite composure. I let Eleanor's words hang in the air for a few seconds. I wanted everyone to hear the sheer audacity of her claim. Then I lifted the microphone back to my lips and laughed. "Really, Eleanor? I asked, my tone laced with absolute mockery. Your family paid for this wedding. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the edge of the dance floor, closing the distance between the stage and the VIP table. I wanted her to look me directly in the eyes. Because I find that incredibly hard to believe, I stated clearly, ensuring every single guest heard me. Considering the $100,000 check you so graciously handed to the wedding planners bounced due to insufficient funds exactly 3 weeks ago. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. Whispers exploded among the tables. Chloe jaw dropped. The venture capitalists, sitting at the VIP table, suddenly looked extremely uncomfortable, shifting away from Eleanor, as if her sudden poverty was contagious. One of them actually pulled out his smartphone, likely texting his financial team to freeze any pending transactions with Julian family. That is right. I continued, raising my voice to cut through the rising commotion. Your bank rejected the check, Eleanor. The account was overdrawn. Your supposedly vast old money fortune could not even cover the floral arrangements. I paid for this entire circus out of my own pocket. I paid for the venue, I paid for the catering, and I paid for the very chair you are currently standing in front of. So do not ever fix your mouth to call me a gold digger when I am the only reason you are not eating dinner at a drive-thru tonight. Eleanor turned an ugly shade of pale. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She looked wildly at Julian, expecting her son to fix the catastrophic humiliation she had just walked into. Julian's face was a mask of pure panic. He realized instantly that his carefully constructed facade of wealth was disintegrating right in front of the key investors he desperately needed. He scrambled up from his seat, knocking his chair over, and charged toward the dance floor. His long strides ate up the distance in seconds. He grabbed my wrist, his grip bruising and desperate. He tried to yank the microphone from my hand, but I held on with a vice grip, refusing to let him silence me. Shut your mouth right now, Julian snarled, his voice a frantic, venomous hiss meant only for my ears, though his face was twisted in rage for everyone to see. If you ruin my image in front of these investors, I swear to you, I will activate the penalty clause in our prenuptial agreement. I will leave you with absolutely nothing. You will walk away from this marriage completely broke and publicly humiliated. I looked down at his shaking hand gripping my wrist. Then I looked up into his panicked, furious blue eyes. The fear radiating from him was palpable. He thought his legal threats still held power over me. He thought I was still the quiet, accommodating woman he could control with paperwork and intimidation. I let a slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. I brought the microphone right up to my lips, making sure the entire ballroom could hear my response to his private threat. Perfect, I said, my voice ringing out with absolute, undeniable authority. Let us talk about the prenup. I turned my phone screen so Preston could see his impending felony. Your name is not on the deed, Preston, I stated, letting the harsh reality wash over the room. The bank alert flagged a withdrawal of $2.5 million approved by the LLC managing director. Me. Preston's smile faltered. You forged my signature to mortgage a property you do not own, I continued. You used my house as collateral to fund that invisible tech startup you have been bragging about all evening. That is federal wire fraud. It carries a minimum sentence of 20 years in prison. Chloe grabbed Preston's arm. Preston, what is she talking about? Tell her she is lying. Preston opened his mouth to speak, but my mother beat him to it. Evelyn slammed her hands on the table. He is a businessman, Simone, Evelyn shouted, rushing to defend the son-in-law she worshipped. He is just borrowing the equity to get his company off the ground. Your house is your sister house. You have no right to threaten him. He stole $2.5 million, Mom. He committed a federal crime. I did what he had to do, Evelyn shrieked. You have always been selfish while Chloe and Preston are building a future. We can work this out without you destroying your sister marriage. This is the FBI knocking on the door, I replied coldly. I am pressing full charges. Chloe let out a scream. The golden child facade shattered. She lunged across the dining space, her eyes wild with unfiltered rage. She reached for the manila folder containing the lease agreement and the bank records, her hands clawing desperately at the documents. You are ruining my life, Chloe shrieked, charging at me with her hands raised. You are just a jealous, miserable failure. You have always been envious of everything I have built. She aimed her acrylic nails right for my face. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not engage in a physical fight. I simply stepped sharply to the left, driven by her own blind momentum. Chloe missed me entirely. She tripped over the edge of the imported Persian rug and crashed headfirst into the Thanksgiving table. The impact was spectacular. The heavy mahogany table shifted. Crystal wine glasses shattered against the hardwood floor. The massive roasted turkey slid off its silver platter and hit the ground with a sickening thud. Chloe fell onto the floor covered in gravy and cranberry sauce, her designer dress completely ruined. My baby Evelyn cried out, running to Chloe and dropping to her knees amid the shattered glass and ruined food. "Simone, look what you did. You are an absolute monster." "I did not touch her," I said, adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. "She did that to herself, just like you all did this to yourselves." While Evelyn fussed over a screaming Chloe, who was currently wiping gravy from her hair, I turned my attention back to the men in the room. Preston was frozen in place, staring at the scattered documents on the floor. He knew his entire wealthy facade was unraveling. Then a horrible wheezing sound cut through the chaos. I looked toward the head of the table. My father Marcus was still in his chair, but his posture had collapsed. His hands were desperately clutching the left side of his chest. His face had turned an alarming shade of gray, and his lips were tinged with blue. He was gasping for air, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "Dad!" I yelled, breaking my calm demeanor for the first time all evening. I rushed toward him. Marcus tried to speak, but only a strangled gargle escaped his throat. He pitched forward, slipping out of his chair and hitting the hardwood floor heavily. The sheer shock of realizing his idolized son-in-law was a federal criminal, and that his home was built on a mountain of fraud, had been too much for his weakened heart. Marcus Evelyn screamed, finally abandoning Chloe and scrambling across the floor to her husband. "Somebody do something. Call an ambulance." I instantly dropped to my knees beside my father, checking his pulse while simultaneously pulling my phone out to dial emergency services. I gave the dispatcher the address, clearly and concisely demanding immediate medical assistance for a suspected severe cardiac event. The dining room was in total pandemonium. Evelyn was wailing uncontrollably, slapping her hands against the floor. Chloe was sitting in the corner, sobbing about her ruined dress and her husband impending arrest. But as I spoke to the emergency dispatcher, pressing 2 fingers against my father's weak pulse, I looked up and saw Preston. He was not helping Marcus. He was not comforting his hysterical wife. He was not looking at the ruined turkey or the shattered wine glasses. Preston was crouching on the other side of my father. Under the guise of checking on his father-in-law, he was subtly reaching his hand into the front pocket of Marcus' trousers. I narrowed my eyes, watching closely as Preston's fingers closed around my father's smartphone. He slipped the device out of the pocket with practiced ease and quickly slid it into his own suit jacket. He looked around to see if anyone had noticed his theft. His eyes met mine. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, answering the dispatcher questions about my father breathing while holding Preston's panicked gaze. He took a step back, moving away from the man currently fighting for his life on the floor. The flashing red and blue lights of the ambulance began to reflect through the front windows of the townhouse, painting the dining room in frantic colors. I could hear the sirens wailing down the street, getting closer by the second, confirming the emergency response was finally arriving tonight. My father was having a massive heart attack, but Preston was only worried about whatever secrets were hidden inside that stolen phone. The microphone felt heavy and powerful in my hand as the word prenup echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Before Julian could even process the trap, he had just walked into his sister-in-law, decided to insert herself into the line of fire. Chloe stepped out from behind the VIP table, smoothing down her overly expensive silk dress. She marched toward the dance floor with that familiar entitled stride she always used when she wanted to put service workers in their place. Her blonde hair bounced as she pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "Maya, lower your voice right now," Chloe commanded, her tone dripping with the kind of racial microaggressions I had spent my entire corporate career navigating. "You are causing a massive scene over absolutely nothing. You are acting like an angry black woman, and you need to calm down before you embarrass our family any further. Just put the microphone away and apologize to Julian." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the humid air of the ballroom. She actually thought she could tone police me at my own wedding in front of my own parents. I saw my father take a step forward, his jaw clenched tight, but I held up my free hand to stop him. I did not need rescuing. I had this situation completely under control. Julian, seeing Chloe take the offensive, suddenly regained his misplaced confidence. He straightened his tuxedo jacket and puffed out his chest, turning to face the crowd of investors and wedding guests. He decided to play his supposed trump card right there on the dance floor. "You want to talk about the prenup?" Julian announced, his voice booming loudly across the silent room. "Let us talk about it, Maya, because you clearly forgot the legal clauses you eagerly signed. If you walk out of this marriage, or if you try to ruin my reputation in front of my business partners, I am legally entitled to 50% of your boutique investment firm. I practically own you and everything you have built. You think you hold the power here because you paid for some flowers and a venue. But the second we said, I do half of your company became my personal property. So go ahead and keep throwing your little tantrum. You are only destroying your own financial future." A loud murmur rippled through the crowd. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, looking worried for my business. Julian crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at me with a sickeningly triumphant smirk. He really thought he had checkmated me. He really thought a piece of paper had chained me to his sinking ship. I raised the microphone back to my lips, and I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that sliced right through his arrogant smirk. I turned my attention to his sister-in-law first. "Do not ever use that condescending tone with me, Chloe." I warned, my voice dangerously calm and echoing off the walls. "And do not ever try to put me in a box with your racist stereotypes. The only thing embarrassing this family right now is the desperate facade you are all trying to maintain." For instance, I pointed directly at the designer handbag resting on her chair at the VIP table. "That Birkin bag you have been flashing around all evening to impress my wealthy clients is as fake as your family wealth. You bought it from a replica dealer. Yao bought it in downtown Los Angeles exactly 3 months ago. I know because the credit card you used was routed through the fraud prevention system at my financial firm." Chloe's face turned an alarming shade of crimson. She gasped and instinctively reached back to hide the bag from the stares of the women sitting at the adjacent tables. I did not give her a single second to recover before I turned the full force of my attention back to my groom. "And as for you, Julian," I said, stepping right into his personal space, "you are absolutely right. A prenuptial agreement is a binding legal contract. But any first-year law student can tell you that a prenup is entirely dependent on one vital condition: full and complete financial disclosure prior to signing." Julian's smirk completely vanished. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a tailored suit. He opened his mouth to speak, but his vocal cords seemed to have failed him. "You told me and my lawyers that your venture capital fund was thriving." I continued, ensuring the investors sitting nearby could hear every single syllable. "You provided financial statements showing massive growth. But you conveniently forgot to disclose the $5 million you embezzled from your own clients. You hid the fact that you lost every single penny of that stolen money on high-risk offshore investments last year. Your company is not thriving, Julian. It is a hollow shell drowning in debt, and you committed federal fraud to cover it up. Therefore, our prenuptial agreement is completely void, and you do not own a single percent of anything I have built." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The high-profile investors sitting at the VIP table leaped to their feet. Chairs crashed backward onto the wooden floor. Men in expensive suits began shouting, pulling out their cell phones and demanding answers. The lead investor pointed a furious finger at Julian, screaming about securing his assets and calling the authorities. The sophisticated elite gathering had transformed into absolute chaos in a matter of seconds. Julian stumbled backward, his hands shaking violently as his entire empire of lies collapsed around him. Suddenly, a piercing shriek cut through the loud commotion. Eleanor, realizing that her son was exposed, decided to play her final desperate card. She clutched her chest with both hands, her eyes rolling back. "I cannot breathe," she wailed, collapsing onto the hard floor to stop me. The silence following my declaration that I owned the auditing firm was so profound, you could hear the ice melting in the untouched champagne glasses. Julian stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, entirely unable to construct a single coherent lie to save himself. His carefully curated image as a wealthy venture capitalist had just been completely dismantled by the very woman he thought he could control. I did not give him a chance to recover. Reaching down into the layers of silk and tulle of my custom bridal gown, I slipped my hand into a hidden pocket I had specifically asked my seamstress to sew in. My fingers wrapped around a small, heavy silver flash drive. I pulled it out and held it up under the glare of the crystal chandeliers, making sure the investors seated at the VIP table had a clear view of it. With a swift, deliberate flick of my wrist, I tossed the drive directly at the lead investor. He caught it awkwardly against his chest, staring down at the small piece of metal as if it were a live grenade. "Every single financial record you thought you destroyed is on that drive," I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy air of the ballroom. The hidden shell corporations, the defaulted loans, the forged asset statements, and the undeniable proof that your family estate filed for bankruptcy 24 months ago. I made sure my auditing team compiled it into a highly organized, color-coded presentation. You can plug it into your laptop right now and verify everything I just said. My firm does not make mistakes, and we certainly do not fund frauds. The lead investor, a stern older man who had flown in from New York specifically to sign the merger papers tonight, turned entirely purple with rage. He looked from the flash drive in his hand to Julian, who was currently backing away, sweat pouring down his pale forehead. "You arrogant, lying piece of trash!" the lead investor snarled, slamming his napkin down onto the table. He shoved his chair back with so much force it toppled over. He signaled to the other businessmen at the table, "We are leaving, and Julian, you can expect a call from our legal team on Monday morning. We are reporting this entire fraudulent scheme to the Securities and Exchange Commission." The group of wealthy investors immediately stood up, grabbing their coats and briefcases. They did not even spare a glance at Julian as they marched past him, their disgust palpable. The money, the only reason Julian had agreed to this elaborate wedding charade, was literally walking out the front doors of the Grand Hall. Suddenly, the dramatic medical emergency happening on the floor came to an abrupt, miraculous halt. Eleanor, who had been lying on the hardwood floor, clutching her chest in a desperate bid for attention, realized her performance was no longer working. With the investors gone and the merger dead, her fake heart attack disappeared. She leaped up from the floor with the agility of a woman half her age. Her aristocratic mask, the refined, polite society persona she had weaponized against my family all evening, completely shattered. Her designer dress was crumpled, her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face, her voice escalating into a hysterical screech that echoed off the historic estate walls. "You vicious, calculating little witch!" Eleanor screamed, entirely abandoning her wealthy composure. Her true colors bled through, ugly and saturated with prejudice. "We should have known better than to let Julian associate with your kind. You are nothing but ghetto trash masquerading in a white dress. You and your grease-smelling parents do not belong in a place like this. You think you are so smart, but you are just a resentful, angry woman trying to tear down a family that actually has a pedigree." My father took a sharp step forward, his jaw tight, but I held up my hand to stop him. I let Eleanor scream. I wanted every guest in the room, every camera phone currently recording, to capture the exact brand of venom she kept hidden behind her pearl necklaces and country club memberships. Eleanor spun around, wildly scanning the room until she spotted the general manager of the estate. He was standing near the grand staircase, observing the chaos with a neutral expression. Eleanor snapped her fingers at him aggressively, treating him like a subservient servant. "Manager," she barked, her voice dripping with venom and classist entitlement, "I demand that you call security this instant. Throw this ghetto trash and her parents out of this historic estate immediately. I want them removed from the premises, and I want the police called if they resist. They are trespassing on elite property." The manager, a sharply dressed man in a charcoal suit, calmly adjusted his tie. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the tense silence of the room. Eleanor crossed her arms, a smug, victorious sneer returning to her face. She truly believed that in a room full of wealth and history, the system would automatically side with a privileged white woman over a black bride. But the manager did not stop beside Eleanor. He completely bypassed her, walking straight past her outstretched, demanding hand. He stepped onto the edge of the dance floor and came to a halt respectfully, right behind my right shoulder. He clasped his hands in front of him and looked directly at Eleanor. "I am terribly sorry, ma'am," the manager said, his voice ringing with absolute polite professionalism. "But I only take orders from the property owner." Eleanor blinked, her face contorting in confusion. "What are you talking about? Julian rented this venue. We are the paying clients." I smiled, a slow, deeply satisfying smile that radiated pure triumph. I stepped forward, closing the distance between me and my monstrous mother-in-law. "Julian did not rent this venue." "Eleanor," I corrected her, keeping my tone deadly calm. "Your bounced check certainly did not rent it either. And you are right about one thing. This is a highly exclusive historic estate. But what your son failed to uncover during his superficial background check on me is that I diversify my financial portfolio heavily into real estate." Chloe, standing nearby, suddenly looked terrified, her fake Birkin bag clutched tightly against her chest. "I bought this entire estate 6 months ago," I announced, letting the sheer weight of the revelation crush the last remnants of their arrogance. "I purchased it through a blind LLC specifically to turn it into a premier event space. The manager takes orders from me because I sign his paychecks. You are not kicking me out of a historic venue, Eleanor. You are currently standing in my house." The collective gasp from the wedding guests was deafening. Eleanor staggered backward, as if I had physically struck her. She looked wildly around the opulent ballroom, the crystal chandeliers, the imported marble floors, suddenly realizing that she was standing completely powerless inside an empire I owned. The wealth she had tried to use to crush me was entirely mine. Julian backed into a corner and, watching his mother crumble, realized that his financial ruin and social destruction were absolute. The humiliation snapped something inside him. His polished, handsome face contorted into something vicious and desperate. He knew he could no longer attack my money, so he went for the only target he thought he had left. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and ripped out his smartphone. He held the screen up, his eyes wide and manic, a cornered animal preparing to bite. "You think you have won," Julian snarled, his voice cracking with desperation. You think you can humiliate my family and just walk away? If you kick us out of this estate right now, I am hitting send on this message." He tapped the screen aggressively, holding it up like a weapon. "I have a video of your little brother Jamal doing drugs at a college party 3 years ago." Julian threatened, a cruel, ugly smile stretching across his face. "If you do not hand over the deed to this estate and apologize to my mother right now, I am sending this video directly to his employer, his university, and every major news outlet in this city. I will ruin his life, Maya. I will destroy his future before it even begins. Do not test me." The screen of Julian's phone glowed brightly in the dimming light of the ballroom, his thumb hovering dangerously over the send button. His chest heaved with erratic breaths. He truly believed he had found my singular weak point. Jamal was my baby brother, a brilliant culinary arts student who had overcome so much to get his life on track. Like many young college kids, he made a reckless mistake at a fraternity party years ago. Julian had somehow acquired the footage and hoarded it like a venomous snake waiting to strike. He thought the threat of destroying a young black man's hard-earned future would force me to my knees. He expected me to shatter, to cry, to sign over my newly purchased estate just to protect my family's reputation. Instead of shrinking, I stood completely still. I did not reach for his phone. I did not beg. I simply stared at him, letting the pathetic reality of his extortion wash over the remaining guests. "You are resorting to blackmail, Julian," I stated, ensuring my voice carried across the silent dance floor. "You are threatening to destroy a 22-year-old kid because you failed to steal from me." Before Julian could respond, Chloe decided it was her moment to manipulate the narrative. Seeing Julian cornered and looking like a complete monster, she immediately deployed the ultimate weapon of deflection. She burst into violent, theatrical tears. Clutching her fake Birkin bag to her chest, she spun around to face the lingering guests, her face crumpled in fabricated agony. "Look at what she is doing to him," Chloe sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Maya is a sociopath. She is a controlling, vindictive woman who manipulated poor Julian into a corner. She set this entire trap just to humiliate our family because she is jealous of our pedigree. Julian is a good man. He is just desperate because she has been mentally abusing him for months. She planned this whole wedding just to destroy us. She is dangerous. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. The classic damsel in distress routine, weaponizing her tears to paint me as the aggressive, unhinged villain who had somehow forced an innocent white man to embezzle millions and resort to blackmail. A few of the older guests murmured their inherent biases, making them susceptible to Chloe's hysterical victimhood. Julian fed off her energy, nodding along and trying to look like a man driven to the edge by a cruel bride. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice to argue with Chloe's ridiculous theatrics. I simply turned my head slightly toward the elevated DJ booth at the far end of the hall. The DJ, a trusted professional I had hired personally, gave me a subtle nod. I raised my index finger and gave him the signal. The ballroom speakers, which had been dead silent since I halted the music, suddenly cracked to life with a sharp hiss of static. Then a crystal-clear audio recording began to play at maximum volume, echoing off the historic marble walls for every single person to hear. It was Julian's voice captured in high definition. "We have no other choice, Mother." Julian's recorded voice sounded frantic, stripping away any illusion of his innocence. "The creditors are giving us 30 days before they foreclose on the mansion and auction it off. We need $2 million in cash by the end of the month, or we are on the streets." Then came Eleanor's voice, dripping with her usual aristocratic arrogance but laced with panic. "Then we use Maya's credentials." Eleanor snapped on the recording. "She has impeccable credit and a massive business portfolio. You have access to her home office, Julian. Just take her social security number and her tax documents. We will apply for the commercial loan under her name. We can forge her signature on the digital applications. Once the merger goes through after the wedding, we will pay it back before she ever notices the debt." "But what if the bank flags it as identity theft?" Julian asked on the audio, sounding cowardly. "It is a federal crime, Mother." "It is only a crime if we get caught," Julian Eleanor hissed back. "She is so blinded by the idea of marrying into our family, she will never check her personal credit reports before the honeymoon. Just get me her social security number tonight. We are saving this family's legacy no matter what it takes." The recording clicked off, plunging the ballroom back into a suffocating heavy silence. Chloe's fake sobbing stopped instantly. Her mouth hung open, her eyes darting frantically around the room as the undeniable truth settled over the crowd. The remaining guests stared at Julian and Eleanor in absolute horror. This was no longer just a messy corporate scandal or a bitter marital dispute. This was premeditated, calculated federal identity theft. They had conspired to steal my social security number, forge my signature, and saddle me with a fraudulent $2 million loan just to save their own sinking ship. Julian's hand, still holding the phone with the blackmail video, dropped limply to his side. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified shell of a man. His leverage over me evaporated into the cold air. Blackmailing me with a college party video meant absolutely nothing when I had just broadcast his confession to a federal felony to a room full of witnesses. Eleanor looked paralyzed. Her eyes were wide, staring blankly at the speakers, as if she could somehow rewind time and erase the audio. The realization that she was facing actual prison time seemed to short-circuit her brain. That is when the crowd parted. From the shadows near the kitchen doors, my father Marcus finally stepped forward. He did not rush. He did not shout. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who knew exactly who he was and exactly how much power he held. He reached up with broad, calloused hands and calmly adjusted the lapels of his perfectly tailored suit. His presence commanded the room, shifting the atmosphere entirely. He walked straight past the whispering guests, his heavy footsteps thudding against the hardwood floor. He walked past Julian, not even granting the trembling groom a single glance. He walked with total, unshakable dignity, directly toward Eleanor, stopping just inches away from where she stood, frozen in shock. My father did not raise his hand. He did not need to. The sheer gravity of his presence was enough to make Eleanor physically cower. He looked down at her, his dark eyes stripping away every last ounce of her false superiority. You talked about the smell of fried grease ruining your aesthetic. My father began, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried effortlessly across the silent ballroom. He spoke with the quiet, dangerous calm of a man who knew his own worth and refused to let anyone diminish it. You looked at my wife and me, and you saw nothing but poor diner owners who did not belong in your elite world. But let me tell you something about that grease, Eleanor. He took a slow step closer, forcing her to look him directly in the eye. That grease comes from 30 years of honest, back-breaking labor. It comes from waking up at 4 in the morning to feed our community, to put a roof over our children, and to build a business that actually belongs to us. There is absolute generational dignity in that work. Our hands might be calloused from years of sacrifice, but they are clean. Your hands, however, are filthy. Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat bobbing nervously, but she could not find a single word of defense. You parade around in designer gowns and demand respect because of some ancestral name. My father continued, his tone dripping with righteous disdain. But your entire existence is a mirage built on theft and fraud. You are nothing but common criminals wearing expensive perfumes to hide the stench of your own bankruptcy. You tried to use my daughter to pay for your failures, and you failed. You will never speak to my family with that tone again. Eleanor visibly shrank, the reality of her complete social and financial destruction finally breaking her spirit. Seeing the undisputed matriarch of the family utterly dismantled, Chloe realized the ship was rapidly sinking. The elegant high society illusion was dead, replaced by the terrifying looming threat of federal prison. Chloe's survival instincts kicked in immediately, completely void of any family loyalty. She turned her panicked, tear-streaked face away from me and aimed her absolute fury directly at Julian. "You psychotic idiot!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking as she lunged toward Julian. She grabbed him by the lapels of his tuxedo, shaking him violently. "What did you do? You dragged us into this. You told us you had the money handled. You told us the investors were secured. You never said anything about identity theft." Julian tried to push her off, stammering defensively, but Chloe was relentless. She turned to the crowd, desperately trying to salvage whatever was left of her carefully curated social standing. "We had no idea," Chloe yelled to the stunned guests, gesturing wildly to her husband Harrison, who was standing paralyzed nearby. "Harrison and I are completely innocent. We are victims here too. Julian and Eleanor lied to us. They manipulated us. We would never participate in a federal crime. Please, you have to believe us. I have a brand to protect. I have a public image. Julian is a monster who ruined his own family." She played the victim flawlessly, attempting to separate herself from the wreckage. She thought she could just walk away, scrub her social media, and pretend she was just another casualty of her brother-in-law deception. I stepped right past my father and closed the distance to Chloe. "You are not innocent, Chloe," I stated firmly, my voice slicing through her pathetic sobbing act. I watched her fake tears dry up instantly as she whipped her head around to face me, true terror flashing in her eyes. "Do not try to play the clueless, victimized bystander with me," I continued, pointing directly at her. "Your entire luxury lifestyle blog, the one you use to show off your supposed old money aesthetic while constantly stealing and appropriating black culture for profit, is built on stolen funds." Chloe gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. I shook my head, refusing to let her escape accountability. "Did you really think I would audit Julian Main Company and just ignore the subsidiaries?" I asked mockingly. "I tracked the wire transfers, Chloe. Julian funneled $300,000 of that embezzled venture capital money directly into your personal media company last year. That money paid for your trips to Milan, your designer wardrobes, and those exclusive photo shoots you constantly brag about online. You did not earn a single dime of that lifestyle. You lived off the money your brother-in-law stole from his clients." Chloe shook her head frantically, her face turning an alarming shade of red. No. Julian told me that was an early inheritance payout. He told me it was a gift from the family trust. I did not know it was stolen money. I swear I did not know." "Ignorance is not a defense when the feds come looking for their missing millions," I replied coldly. "You accepted stolen funds across state lines to fund a business. That makes you an accessory to wire fraud and money laundering. You are going down right alongside them." The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. Harrison, Julian older brother, and Chloe husband finally snapped out of his paralyzed daze. His eyes went wide as the legal implications of my words processed in his brain. His wife had accepted embezzled money, meaning his own household assets were now tied to Julian's massive federal crimes. He was going to lose his house, his career, and his freedom, all because of his mother and his brother. Harrison let out a guttural roar of pure rage. He turned on Julian, his face twisted in absolute fury. "You ruined us!" Harrison screamed. Before Julian could even raise his hands to defend himself, Harrison lunged. He swung his arm in a wide, vicious arc and slapped the smartphone right out of Julian's hand. The device, the one holding the blackmail video of my brother, flew through the air and shattered violently against the marble floor, sliding uselessly under a nearby catering table. Julian yelled in shock and grabbed his brother by the collar. Harrison retaliated by driving his fist directly into Julian's jaw. The sickening sound of the punch echoed through the grand hall. Julian stumbled backward, crashing heavily into the VIP table and knocking over a towering display of crystal champagne flutes. Glass shattered everywhere. Eleanor shrieked, lunging forward to pull Harrison off her favorite son. Chloe screamed and grabbed Eleanor by the hair, trying to pull her mother-in-law away from the fight. In an instant, the polished, sophisticated, wealthy family completely disintegrated into a chaotic, vicious physical brawl, rolling and punching each other right there on the pristine hardwood floor, mere inches away from the towering 5-tier wedding cake. The sound of shattering crystal and expensive silk tearing filled the grand ballroom. The venue had descended into pure, unadulterated chaos. High society elites, the same people who had turned up their noses at my parents just an hour ago, were now shoving each other out of the way to get a better view. Dozens of smartphone cameras were raised high in the air, recording every pathetic second of the brawl. The flashing lights illuminated the scene like a cheap reality television show. Harrison had Julian pinned against the ruined remnants of the VIP table, landing another heavy punch across his jaw. Chloe was still yanking on Eleanor's perfectly styled hair, screaming about her ruined brand, while Eleanor wildly flailed her arms trying to scratch Chloe's face. I stood a few feet away, utterly untouchable. I did not flinch. I did not step back. My father stood stoically to my right, his hands resting comfortably in his pockets, watching the destruction of the people who had dared to insult his legacy. My mother stood on my left, her head held high. We were a fortress of quiet dignity, amidst a sea of aristocratic garbage. Julian finally managed to shove his older brother off him. He scrambled away from the flailing limbs of his mother and sister-in-law. His tuxedo jacket was torn at the shoulder. His expensive bow tie hung limply by a single thread, and a dark trickle of blood leaked from the corner of his swollen lip. He looked pathetic. He looked exactly like the hollow, spineless fraud he truly was. He crawled across the polished hardwood floor, his hands sliding over the spilled champagne, pulling himself directly toward my feet. He did not even try to stand up. He stayed on his knees, staring up at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Maya, please," Julian sobbed, his voice cracking horribly. The arrogant venture capitalist was completely gone, replaced by a sniveling coward. "Please, you have to listen to me. I love you. I never wanted to do any of this. It was her." He pointed a trembling, blood-stained finger back at his mother, who was currently wrestling Chloe onto the floor. "She forced me to do it. She told me we would lose the ancestral home if I did not secure the loans. She manipulated me. I am so sorry. Just give me a second chance. I will change. I will cut them off. We can start over. Please, Maya." I looked down at the man I had almost bound my life and my assets to. There was no pity in my heart. There was no lingering affection. The only emotion running through my veins was absolute clarity. "You do not love me, Julian," I stated, my voice echoing with an icy, undeniable truth. "You loved my credit score. You loved my bank accounts. You loved the fact that my hard work could finance your pathetic illusion of a life. And you are right about one thing. Your mother is a monster. But you are a grown man who happily handed her the keys to my kingdom." I reached a hand into the structured bodice of my custom bridal gown. The guests closest to us gasped, whispering wildly, wondering what else I could possibly expose. My fingers brushed against the thick folded parchment paper I had tucked away just before walking down the aisle. I pulled the document out and let it unfold, the crisp white paper snapping sharply in the tense air. I held it out, dangling it just out of Julian's reach. "This is not a divorce decree, Julian," I announced, ensuring my voice carried over the sounds of his sobbing and the scuffling happening behind him. "I am not going to endure months of legal mediation with a thief. This is a formal petition for a legal annulment on the grounds of egregious financial fraud and identity theft. It explicitly states that this marriage was invalid from the moment we signed the license because it was procured under premeditated deception." Julian stared at the paper as if it were a death warrant. He swallowed hard, a fresh wave of tears spilling over his cheeks. "You have two options right now." I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal, uncompromising register. "Option 1. You sign this paper. You waive your right to contest the annulment. You waive your right to any spousal support, and you walk out of my estate tonight with absolutely nothing. You leave with the clothes on your back and the debt you created." I paused, letting the severity of the choice sink in before delivering the final blow. "Option 2, I said, leaning in slightly. "You refuse to sign, and if you refuse, I will not wait until Monday morning. I will call the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now. I will hand them the unedited audio recording of you and your mother plotting federal wire fraud, and I will hand them the forensic accounting files detailing the $5 million you embezzled from your clients. You will not just be broke, Julian. You will go to federal prison for a very long time." Julian began to hyperventilate. His eyes darted from the annulment papers to my cold, unwavering expression. He knew I was not bluffing. He knew I held his entire life in the palm of my hand. Trembling violently, he reached his hand into his torn tuxedo jacket and pulled out a silver pen. "No." The screech was inhuman. Eleanor had managed to push Chloe off her. She scrambled to her feet, her designer gown ripped at the seams, her face smeared with mascara and sweat. She saw her favorite son on his knees, reaching for the pen to sign away their last desperate hope of financial salvation. The sight of Julian submitting to a black woman he was supposed to exploit pushed Eleanor completely over the edge of sanity. She grabbed a heavy crystal champagne flute from a nearby table. Enraged beyond all reason, Eleanor lunged violently across the dance floor. She charged directly at me, gripping the heavy crystal glass like a jagged weapon, her eyes wide with a murderous classist fury. She intended to strike my face, to physically destroy the woman who had just dismantled her entire aristocratic bloodline. I did not even blink. I did not have to. My father, Marcus, moved with the smooth, calculated precision of a man who had spent his entire life protecting his family from danger. He stepped smoothly in front of me, placing his solid frame between my body and Eleanor's frantic charge. He did not strike her. He simply reached out and caught her wrist mid-swing. With a fluid, effortless rotation of his shoulders, he redirected her own aggressive momentum right past us. Eleanor shrieked as she lost her balance. Her expensive heels slipped on the champagne-soaked floor. She flew forward, her arms flailing wildly as she crashed headfirst into the centerpiece of the room. The impact was spectacular. Eleanor face planted directly into the towering custom-made $15,000 wedding cake. Layers of thick vanilla buttercream, imported edible gold leaf, and dense sponge cake exploded upon impact. The entire 5-tier masterpiece collapsed, burying the fake aristocrat in a massive, sticky avalanche of white frosting and ruined pride. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the ballroom, broken only by the sound of crumbling cake tiers hitting the polished floor. Eleanor thrashed blindly in the wreckage of the $15,000 dessert. She clawed her way out of the debris, looking like a swamp monster emerging from a sugary lagoon. Thick layers of imported vanilla buttercream coated her expensive designer gown. Edible gold leaf and chunks of dense sponge cake clung to her perfectly highlighted hair. She wiped a massive glob of white fondant from her eyes, smearing dark mascara down her cheeks in jagged, ugly lines. The aristocratic matriarch was completely gone. In her place was a feral, humiliated woman stripped of every ounce of her fabricated dignity. Eleanor opened her mouth and let out a shriek that sounded exactly like a banshee. She scrambled to her knees, slipping frantically on the frosting-coated hardwood floor. She pointed a trembling, frosting-covered finger directly at my father and then wildly at me. "You are dead!" Eleanor screamed, her voice cracking with raw, unhinged fury. "Do you hear me, Maya? You and your entire pathetic family are completely dead. I am going to call the most ruthless, high-powered lawyers in this entire state. I am going to sue you for assault, for defamation, for emotional distress, and for every single penny you have ever made. I will drag your names through the mud until you are begging for mercy on the streets." She gasped for air, spitting out a mouthful of buttercream. "You think you have won because you have a little bit of new money. You think you can embarrass us and walk away. You have absolutely no idea who you are messing with. My family ancestral mansion holds enough equity to fund your complete and utter destruction. I will leverage every single brick of that historic suburban property to wipe your ghetto family off the map. You will be paying us damages for the rest of your miserable lives." Hearing his mother invoke the family estate shifted something inside Julian. He was still kneeling at my feet, holding the silver pen over the annulment papers. Just seconds ago, he was a sniveling coward ready to surrender everything. But the mention of the ancestral mansion threw him a lifeline. He clung to his mother's delusional rant like a drowning man clutching a life raft. Julian's hand hovered over the signature line. He stopped. He looked up at me, his tear-stained face hardening with a renewed, desperate arrogance. He slowly pulled the pen back away from the legal document. "She is right," Julian muttered, his voice gaining a sickening level of false confidence. "You cannot just force me to sign away my legal rights under duress. We still have power, Maya. We still have vast resources. My family estate is worth tens of millions. If we liquidate the equity, we can bury you in legal fees for decades to come. If you want this annulment to go smoothly, you are going to have to negotiate. You are going to have to pay me to walk away quietly." He actually thought he had leverage. He genuinely believed that the crumbling bricks of his mother foreclosed mansion gave him the power to extort the woman he had just tried to scam. He dropped the pen onto the floor and crossed his arms, trying to reclaim a shred of his masculine authority. He looked at me expecting fear, expecting me to panic and offer him a multi-million-dollar settlement just to avoid a protracted legal war. Instead, I burst into genuine laughter. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a deep, rich belly laugh that echoed wildly through the quiet ballroom. I tossed my head back and laughed at the sheer absurd audacity of these entitled people. The remaining guests stared in absolute shock as my laughter cut through the thick tension. Even my mother Helene let out a soft, amused chuckle from her place beside my father. Julian recoiled, his false confidence shattering all over again. "What is so funny?" he demanded, his voice pitching upward in pure panic. I took a deep breath, wiping a tear of pure amusement from the corner of my eye. I looked down at Julian and then over at Eleanor, who was still kneeling in the ruined cake, glaring at me like a cornered animal. "You want to leverage the equity in your ancestral mansion?" I asked, my voice dripping with lethal amusement. "You want to use that historic property to fund a legal war against me?" I took a slow, deliberate step toward Eleanor. "About your ancestral mansion." "Eleanor," I said, tilting my head slightly to look down at her, "you seem to have missed a very important piece of certified mail this past week. Probably because you were too busy planning this fake wedding and plotting federal identity theft to actually open your mailbox. Your mortgage has been in severe default for over a year. The bank finally grew tired of your endless excuses and sold the debt to a private credit union." Eleanor's face went completely slack beneath the layers of cake. The terrifying realization that her deepest financial secret was entirely exposed hit her like a physical blow. "That private credit union," I continued, my voice ringing with undeniable authority, "bought your defaulted mortgage for pennies on the dollar. They now hold the physical deed to your precious estate. And it just so happens that this specific credit union is owned and operated entirely by a coalition of successful Black enterprises." I turned slowly and gestured gracefully to my father. Marcus stood tall, his broad shoulders squared, his dark eyes gleaming with quiet, relentless power. "And my dad," I announced, locking eyes with Eleanor. "The very man you said smelled like fried grease, the man you tried to shove by the kitchen doors because he did not fit your racist elite aesthetic. He is the chief executive officer of that exact credit union." The collective gasp from the wedding guests was absolutely deafening. The sheer magnitude of the twist paralyzed the entire room. The old money matriarch, who had spent the entire evening looking down on black wealth, had just discovered that a black man literally owned the roof over her head. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes bulged wildly, staring at my father as if he were a terrifying apparition. Julian let out a strangled whimper, clutching his head with both hands, realizing that his mother's final threat was completely useless. They had no money. They had no leverage. They did not even have a home. My father stepped forward. He did not rush. He moved with the slow, deliberate elegance of a king, executing a final, flawless checkmate. He reached a large, steady hand into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit. He pulled out a crisp document carefully protected inside a clear plastic sleeve. He walked right up to the edge of the destroyed cake, looking down at Eleanor. She cowered beneath his intense gaze, shivering in her ruined designer gown. "My daughter told you to check your mail, Eleanor." My father said, his voice a rich, deep rumble that commanded absolute respect. "But since you missed it, I decided to deliver it personally tonight." He held the plastic-sleeved document out. It was a formal, legally binding 30-day eviction notice. My father did not hand it to her. He simply let go. The document fluttered downward, landing with a soft, wet smack right into the thick layer of vanilla cake frosting resting mere inches from Eleanor's humiliated face. The paper sat there in the sugary wreckage. Eleanor stared at the bold black letters spelling out the 30-day eviction notice. Her breath hitched. The reality of her situation crashed down on her shoulders with the undeniable weight of a collapsing building. She was officially homeless. The ancestral mansion belonged to the man she had just tried to banish to the kitchen. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her credit was entirely destroyed. She began to hyperventilate, taking short, ragged gasps of air. The towering arrogance that had defined her entire life was completely stripped away, leaving nothing but a pathetic frosting-covered shell. She clutched at the ruined tulle of her designer gown. Her eyes darted wildly around the opulent ballroom, as if searching for a legal loophole or a waking moment from this absolute nightmare. But there was no waking up. This was her new brutal reality. Seeing the undisputed matriarch of the family reduced to a trembling mess on the hardwood floor, Chloe realized there was no one left to protect her. The luxurious world she had built on the back of stolen funds was disintegrating right before her eyes. The terrifying threat of federal wire fraud charges loomed over her head like an executioner blade. Self-preservation took over completely. Chloe threw herself across the dance floor, her expensive silk dress sliding against the polished wood as she dropped heavily to her knees right in front of my feet. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup, but she did not care. She clasped her hands together in a desperate, pathetic gesture of total submission. "Maya, please," Chloe sobbed, her voice echoing shrilly in the quiet ballroom. "I am begging you. You have to listen to me. I had no idea how deep their lies went. I swear I will do whatever you want. I will go to the authorities. I will testify against Eleanor. I will testify against Julian in federal court. I will hand over every single bank statement proving they orchestrated the embezzlement scheme. Just spare me from the wire fraud charges. Do not send me to prison. I have a brand. Please have mercy on me." She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, completely willing to sell out her own flesh and blood to save her skin. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but pure, unadulterated disdain. I let her kneel there, begging for salvation from the very black woman she had tried to put in her place just an hour ago. "You want mercy," I said, my voice dangerously soft, yet carrying an undeniable edge of solid steel. I tilted my head, examining her tear-stained face. "You set the seating chart today, Chloe." Chloe froze her breath, catching painfully in her throat. "Yes," I continued, my gaze locking onto hers with lethal precision. "I know exactly who arranged the tables in this room. You deliberately took my parents, the hard-working people who sacrificed their blood and sweat to build a solid future for me, and you put them by the kitchen doors. You tried to humiliate my family to protect your fake stolen aesthetic." I leaned in slightly, ensuring she heard every single syllable of her impending doom. "I have zero mercy for you." A sharp, disgusted scoff broke the heavy tension. Harrison Chloe's husband had been standing paralyzed near the ruined VIP table, absorbing the sheer magnitude of his wife's treachery. Watching her enthusiastically offer to throw his own mother and brother into federal prison to save herself was the final straw. He walked over, his face pale and twisted with absolute revulsion. He looked down at his wife kneeling on the floor. "I am filing for divorce first thing Monday morning," Harrison stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Do not bother coming back to our house tonight. The locks will be changed." Chloe let out a gut-wrenching scream, reaching desperately for his pant leg. But Harrison simply stepped back, turning his back on the entire toxic family. He walked straight out the grand front doors, leaving his wife sobbing uncontrolled, and his mother struggling to breathe in the wreckage of the wedding cake. He was entirely alone. The grand illusion was utterly dead. His hands shook violently as he reached out and picked up the silver pen from the hardwood floor. He did not look at me. He placed the annulment papers against his knee and signed his name. His hand trembled so badly the signature was barely legible, but it was legal. I was signing away any claim to my assets and my life. He was officially walking away with nothing but the massive debt and the federal crimes he had committed. Julian slowly stood up, looking like a completely broken, defeated man. He held the signed legal document out to me, his hand shaking uncontrollably. I took the paper from his grasp, securing my complete and total freedom from his parasitic family. I had protected everything my parents and I had built. Julian kept the silver pen extended, attempting to hand it back to me in a final pathetic gesture of total surrender. His eyes were downcast, stripped of every ounce of the arrogant pride he had paraded around all evening. But just as his trembling fingers released the pen into my open palm, a new terrifying sound pierced the heavy silence of the grand estate. It started as a distant wail cutting sharply through the cool night air, but it grew louder and far more aggressive with every single passing second. The unmistakable piercing shriek of heavy police sirens echoed loudly through the historic stained glass windows. The red and blue lights began to flash against the walls, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers as multiple squad cars rushed up the estate's long winding driveway, coming directly for them. The heavy wail of the police sirens grew deafening, cutting through the opulent silence of the ballroom. Flashes of harsh red and blue light violently pierced the historic stained glass windows, casting jagged, frantic shadows across the dance floor. The colored lights danced over the sticky white frosting still clinging to Eleanor's ruined designer gown and illuminated the terrified pale face of Julian. He was still kneeling on the hardwood floor, his hand frozen mid-air after releasing the silver pen into my palm. He whipped his head toward the grand entrance, his chest heaving with sheer panic. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with wild accusation. He demanded to know if I had called the authorities, accusing me of breaking our unspoken agreement the second he signed the annulment papers. I looked down at him, sliding the legal document safely into the hidden pocket of my gown. I shook my head slowly, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. I told him I did not need to make a single phone call tonight. I reminded him about the lead investor, the powerful venture capitalist who had caught the flash drive containing his entirely fraudulent financial records. I watched the realization hit Julian like a physical blow. Those elite businessmen did not just walk out of the venue to save their reputations. They walked straight to their cars and immediately contacted the federal authorities. They reported the massive $5 million embezzlement scheme Julian had been running for the past 2 years. The police were not here for a simple domestic dispute. They were here for high-level corporate fraud. The heavy mahogany double doors of the grand hall burst open with terrifying force. A squad of armed police officers marched into the elegant reception space, their heavy boots thudding against the imported marble floors. They bypassed the whispering guests and the floral centerpieces, their eyes scanning the room until they locked onto the ruined VIP table. The sheer contrast between the elite, sophisticated wedding aesthetic and the grim, undeniable reality of law enforcement entering the space was staggering. Eleanor, still covered in the remnants of the $15,000 wedding cake, froze completely. The flashing police lights caught the edible gold leaf stuck to her messy hair. The reality of her situation finally shattered the last remaining wall of her aristocratic delusion. She was bankrupt. She was homeless. and now she was facing severe federal charges for identity theft and wire fraud. Eleanor began to shake uncontrollably. She looked at the officers marching steadily across the dance floor, and then she looked at her own hands. She knew exactly what federal prison meant for a woman of her age and former status. She had absolutely no resources left to hire a high-powered defense attorney, and public defenders would not be able to save her from the undeniable audio evidence I had broadcasted just minutes earlier. Desperation, raw and ugly, took over Eleanor entirely. She scrambled across the frosting-coated floor, slipping and sliding until she reached Julian. She grabbed him violently by the torn lapels of his tuxedo, her manicured nails digging into his chest. She yanked him downward, forcing him to look directly into her wild, mascara-stained eyes. She did not offer words of comfort. She did not apologize for dragging her favorite son into a massive federal conspiracy. Instead, she demanded the ultimate sacrifice to save her own skin. She shook him hard, her voice a frantic, breathless hiss that carried easily in the quiet ballroom. She told Julian he had to take the fall for everything. She begged him to tell the police that he acted alone, that he orchestrated the identity theft without her knowledge, and that she was merely a clueless victim of his corporate ambition. She gripped his face, smearing sticky buttercream across his cheek, and screamed that she simply could not survive behind bars. She weaponized his youth against him, crying that he was young, resilient, and capable of bouncing back after serving a decade in federal prison. She wailed that she was too old, too fragile, and too refined to spend the rest of her natural life locked in a concrete cell. She demanded he repay her for giving him life by handing over his freedom. I stood a few feet away, watching the absolute destruction of their supposed old money loyalty. This was the family that had looked down on my hardworking parents. This was the woman who claimed my bloodline lacked dignity. Yet here she was, begging her own child to throw his life away just to protect her fragile comfort. But if Eleanor thought her son possessed any actual loyalty or honor, she was severely mistaken. The same cowardice that led Julian to scam his investors and betray my trust flared up instantly in the face of prison time. Julian looked at the police officers closing in on them, and then he looked down at his mother, desperate, pleading face. Without a single second of hesitation, Julian shoved his mother backward. He pushed her away with so much force that she tumbled back into the sugary wreckage of the cake. Julian threw his hands up in the air, backing away from her, as the officers stepped onto the edge of the dance floor. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at the woman who gave birth to him. He screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking with sheer terror, making sure every officer and guest heard him. He declared that Eleanor was the sole mastermind behind the entire identity theft operation. He yelled that she had manipulated him, bullied him, and forced him to steal my financial information to save her foreclosed mansion. The officers grabbed them both, completely ignoring their chaotic screams. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked loudly around both their wrists. Dragged forcefully toward the exit, Eleanor shrieked vicious curses at her son, their relationship permanently destroyed. The heavy oak doors of the grand hall slammed shut behind the police officers. The flashing red and blue lights that had painted the ballroom walls slowly faded away as the squad cars rolled down the long, winding driveway of my estate. The frantic, chaotic energy that had consumed the room just moments ago vanished right along with them. Chloe had slipped out a side door shortly after Harrison abandoned her, attempting to hide her tear-stained face behind her fake designer bag, completely stripped of the arrogant pride she had flaunted all evening. The wealthy venture capitalists had packed up their briefcases and swiftly exited the premises, eager to contact the federal authorities and distance their portfolios from Julian's massive embezzlement scandal. Suddenly, the massive historic ballroom was eerily quiet. The deafening screams, the physical brawling, the sound of shattering glass, and the wail of police sirens had all evaporated. I stood in the center of the dance floor, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air filtering in through the open terrace doors. I looked around the room. The people who had looked down their noses at my family were entirely gone. The only people left, standing in the grand hall, were my genuine friends, my loyal colleagues from my investment firm, and my beautiful family. The people who actually loved me. The people who knew my worth long before I ever bought this estate. The physical wreckage of Julian fake aristocratic illusion was scattered everywhere. Overturned gold Chiavari chairs lay haphazardly on the polished hardwood floor. Shards of broken crystal from the champagne flutes sparkled under the warm light of the chandeliers. And of course, the $15,000 wedding cake sat entirely obliterated in a massive sticky pile of vanilla buttercream and crushed sponge cake near the edge of the stage. From the corner of my eye, I saw Sharon, the head catering manager, step hesitantly out from behind the swinging kitchen doors. She carefully navigated her way around the broken glass and the spilled champagne, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. She looked completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the destruction. She had been hired to cater an elite high society wedding, and instead she had just witnessed a federal arrest and a spectacular family takedown. Sharon stopped a few feet away from me, glancing nervously at the ruined cake and then up at my face. She cleared her throat, her voice tentative in the quiet room. "Excuse me, ma'am." Sharon started, keeping her tone deeply respectful. "Given the circumstances and the obvious disruption to the evening schedule, I need to ask how you want to proceed. Should I instruct the kitchen staff to start packing up the remaining food? Should we begin boxing up the floral centerpieces and shut down the venue for the night? My staff can help clear the debris before we lock the doors." It was a completely logical question. Any normal bride whose groom had just been hauled off to federal prison in handcuffs would be sobbing in the bridal suite, begging everyone to leave her alone to mourn her shattered fairy tale. But I was not a normal bride. I was a black woman who had just successfully amputated a parasite from her life and protected her hard-earned financial empire. I did not answer Sharon immediately. Instead, I turned away from her and searched the quiet ballroom for the only two opinions that mattered to me. Marcus and Helene, my incredible parents, were already walking toward me. They did not look traumatized. They did not look embarrassed by the spectacle. They walked across the dance floor with their heads held high, radiating an overwhelming, powerful sense of pure black parental pride. My father's broad shoulders were relaxed, his dark eyes gleaming with deep satisfaction. He had watched his daughter stand her ground against a family of racist entitled frauds, and he had watched me win entirely on my own terms. My mother stepped right up to me. She did not offer me a tissue because she knew I did not have a single tear to shed. She reached out with a warm, steady hand and gently touched my cheek. Her fingers traced the edge of my jawline, grounding me instantly. "You handled your business, baby girl," my mother said, her voice rich with absolute, unwavering approval. "You did exactly what you had to do to protect yourself, and you did not let them take a single ounce of your dignity. I am so proud of you." Those words anchored my soul. The validation from the woman who had sacrificed everything for my success erased any lingering tension in my shoulders. I smiled, placing my hand over hers and giving it a firm squeeze. I drew a deep, revitalizing breath and turned my attention back to the catering manager, who was still standing by with her clipboard waiting for the order to send everyone home. "Absolutely not," I told Sharon, my voice ringing with bright, renewed energy. "We are not packing up a single thing, and we are certainly not shutting down this venue." Sharon blinked, her eyes widening in surprise. I gestured toward the kitchen doors and then pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the sticky, ruined mess on the floor where my former mother-in-law had met her ultimate humiliation. "The trash has already been taken out," Sharon, I announced, letting a bright, genuine smile spread across my face. "The fraudsters and the racists are gone. The people left in this room are my real family and my true friends. They came here tonight to celebrate, and I fully intend to give them a celebration worthy of this beautiful estate. So tell your kitchen staff to fire those ovens back up. Tell them to bring out the main courses. Tell them to start pouring the good champagne. Now we eat." Sharon's face instantly transformed. A wide, relieved grin broke across her features. She nodded enthusiastically, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am. I will have the staff clear this broken glass immediately, and we will start the dinner service." She spun around and marched briskly back toward the kitchen, shouting energetic orders to her waiting crew. The atmosphere in the room immediately lifted. The heavy tension that Julian family had brought into the estate was entirely gone, replaced by a vibrant, buzzing anticipation. My friends and family began to laugh, pulling their chairs back up to the tables and chatting excitedly about the incredible feast that was about to be served. I stood in the center of the floor, feeling a massive wave of liberation wash over me. But there was still one heavy, restrictive thing holding me back. I reached up with both hands, grabbing the thick, ornate bridal veil that was pinned tightly into my hair. The veil Julian mother had insisted I wear to look more traditional. I gripped the expensive lace and yanked it hard, pulling the pins right out of my curls. I stared at the heavy white fabric for a brief second before tossing it carelessly onto the hardwood floor, right next to the smeared frosting of the ruined wedding cake. It belonged in the garbage along with everything else Julian family represented. I rolled my shoulders, feeling completely unburdened. I walked over to the edge of the stage, bent down, and grabbed the microphone I had dropped during the chaotic brawl. I turned around, gripping the metal handle tightly, ready to address my real family one last time. The heavy, oppressive weight of Julian and his family was completely gone, leaving behind a space filled entirely with authentic connection. I looked out at the faces of the people who had stayed. These were my childhood friends, my college roommates, my mentors from the financial district, and the loyal regular customers from my parents' restaurant who had watched me grow up. They were looking back at me with absolute support and unwavering love. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed through the grand ballroom, but this time it did not carry the sharp edge of battle. It carried the pure, unmistakable ring of total liberation. "Thank you all for staying." I began, a wide, genuine smile spreading across my face. "I know this evening did not go exactly as any of us planned. We came here expecting to celebrate a union, but instead we witnessed the removal of a massive fraud. So I am making an executive decision right now." I looked around the beautiful historic estate that I owned, free and clear. "This is no longer a wedding," I announced, my voice soaring over the speakers. "Welcome to my Independence Day party." The ballroom erupted. My friends and family broke into thunderous applause. Some people whistled, others cheered loudly, and my best friends from college gave me a standing ovation. The stifling, suffocating tension that had gripped the room all night vanished in a single instant. I turned toward the DJ booth at the far end of the hall. The DJ, a close friend of my brother, gave me a massive grin and a crisp salute. I nodded at him. "Hit it," I commanded. The DJ did not hesitate. He immediately cut the quiet, stiff classical background music that Eleanor had insisted on playing all evening. A heavy, infectious bass line dropped instantly, vibrating through the floorboards and rattling the crystal chandeliers overhead. The rich, upbeat sounds of classic, soulful rhythm and blues flooded the massive space. The music was vibrant, energetic, and undeniably black. It was the kind of music you played at a family cookout, a summer block party, or a triumphant celebration of life. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate and electric. People immediately started swaying in their seats, clapping their hands to the beat, and letting go of the stress from the past hour. I walked off the stage and headed straight for my parents. They were still standing near the edge of the dance floor, watching me with radiant pride. I took my father by his right hand and my mother by her left. I gently led them away from the kitchen doors where Chloe had so cruelly banished them. I guided them directly to the absolute center of the room. We walked up to the lavish VIP head table, the exact table Julian family had tried to monopolize. The catering staff had already worked a miracle, clearing away the shattered glass, the overturned chairs, and the remnants of the ruined wedding cake. They had quickly reset the table with fresh linens and polished silverware. "Take your seats," I told my parents, pulling out the two grandest chairs at the absolute center of the table. "These belong to you." My father smiled, his dark eyes shining with deep emotion as he helped my mother into her seat before sitting down beside her. My brother Jamal walked over and took the seat next to them, high-fiving me as he sat down. My closest friends quickly filled in the remaining seats at the head table, laughing and claiming their spots. There was no more fake hierarchy. There was no more pretending to be something we were not just to appease a bankrupt racist family. We were sitting at the head of the table in an estate that I owned, celebrating a victory we had earned. The kitchen doors swung open, and the catering staff marched out in a perfectly choreographed line. Instead of the tiny, pretentious portions of bland food Eleanor had chosen, they brought out the backup menu I had secretly arranged weeks ago just in case. Massive platters of rich, expertly seasoned food filled the tables. The smell of roasted meats, vibrant spices, and warm, freshly baked bread completely overtook the room. It was a feast fit for a true celebration. The guests who truly loved and supported me dug in passing plates and pouring fresh glasses of wine. The room was alive with joyous conversation and genuine laughter. After we ate, the real party began. The DJ transitioned seamlessly into an upbeat, energetic track that immediately drew people out of their seats. My college friends rushed the dance floor, pulling me along with them. I danced in my custom gown, feeling the heavy silk swirl around my legs, completely unbothered by the fact that I was a bride without a groom. I did not need a groom. I had my freedom, my dignity, and my empire. As the song faded out, the DJ slowed the tempo down. He put on a classic soulful ballad, a song that spoke of enduring love, deep roots, and family strength. The lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, casting a warm golden hue over the dance floor. The crowd naturally parted, leaving a space in the center. My father stepped out from the VIP table. He buttoned his suit jacket and walked toward me with that same steady, powerful grace he had shown all evening. He stopped in front of me and offered his hand. I placed my hand in his, and he gently pulled me into a traditional father-daughter dance. We moved slowly across the polished wood, the music wrapping around us like a warm embrace. "You did good today, Maya," my father whispered, his deep voice vibrating in his chest. "You stood tall. You protected your spirit, and you protected this family. I have never been more proud of you than I am right now." I rested my head against his shoulder, closing my eyes as we swayed to the rhythm of the music. "Thank you, Dad," I replied softly. "I learned how to stand tall by watching you and Mom. They thought they could break us because they had an old name. But they forgot that we have a foundation they could never break." My father chuckled, a rich, warm sound. "They relied on an illusion," he said. "We rely on the truth, and the truth always wins in the end." We continued to dance in the center of the grand ballroom. The moment was incredibly symbolic. It was not just a father and his daughter sharing a dance. It was the absolute, undeniable triumph of generational Black wealth, hard work, and unshakable dignity over racist old money entitlement and desperate fraud. Julian and his family had tried to use their fake pedigree to strip us of our humanity, but they had only succeeded in exposing their own rotting foundation. I had reclaimed my narrative, my assets, and my future. I held on to my father, knowing that the legacy we were building was stronger than any mansion Eleanor could ever claim to own. The night was ours, and my new life had officially begun. I opened my eyes and looked over my father's shoulder, watching my mother smiling at us from the VIP table. She raised her glass of wine in a silent toast, her eyes shimmering with happy tears. My brother Jamal was laughing with my best friends, completely safe from the vicious blackmail Julian had tried to use against him. The community of people filling my estate represented everything beautiful and authentic about my life. The contrast between this room full of black joy and the cold, sterile manipulation I had just escaped was staggering. I realized then that my wealth was not just in the bank accounts or the property deeds I held. My true wealth was the unyielding love of the people surrounding me on this dance floor. I squeezed my father's hand tightly, letting the soulful music carry us through the remainder of the song. The battle was over. The war was won. I was a free woman stepping boldly into a brilliantly bright future. 1 month passed since the night I turned my disastrous wedding into a celebration of liberation. I sat behind the expansive mahogany desk in my corner office, overlooking the city skyline. The morning sun poured through the windows, bathing the modern room in a confident light. My financial investment firm had always been successful, but the past 4 weeks brought an unprecedented surge of growth. The guests had recorded my confrontation with Julian and his mother, and the footage inevitably leaked online. The internet watched a black woman dismantle a fraudulent old money empire with hard facts and undeniable grace. The viral exposure did not ruin my reputation. It supercharged it. Investors and business leaders wanted to work with the auditor who possessed the ruthless integrity to publicly expose a $5 million embezzlement scheme. I pulled up the latest quarterly reports on my monitors. Our revenue had tripled. We were expanding operations and preparing to launch a specialized fund dedicated entirely to minority-owned startups. I took a sip of coffee, feeling a profound sense of peace. The fake aristocratic world Julian tried to force me into felt like a distant nightmare compared to the authentic empire I was building. My quiet reflection was interrupted by the muted sound of the flat-screen television mounted on my office wall. I always kept the financial news network running in the background. A breaking news banner flashed across the screen, catching my immediate attention. I reached for the remote and turned up the volume. The news anchor announced that a massive federal indictment had just been unsealed downtown. The camera cut to footage of a courthouse. Two familiar figures were escorted up the concrete steps by federal marshals. It was Julian and Eleanor. They were no longer wearing tailored tuxedos and silk gowns. They were dressed in standard county jail uniforms, their hands heavily cuffed in front of them. The anchor detailed the extensive list of charges they were formally facing. Multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and aggravated identity theft. The broadcast explained how the mother and son conspired to defraud investors of $5 million and attempted to steal my identity to secure a fraudulent loan. Watching Eleanor shuffle up those courthouse steps, her head bowed to hide from the flashing paparazzi cameras, brought me an overwhelming sense of closure. Her ancestral mansion had already been seized and boarded up. Her country club memberships were instantly revoked. The woman who sneered at my parents' hard work was now facing the terrifying reality of the federal justice system. She gambled her freedom for the sake of an aesthetic and lost everything. I muted the television and turned back to my computer. A notification popped up on my screen. My brother Jamal sent me a link to a social media thread with a laughing emoji. I clicked the link out of curiosity. It directed me to a celebrity gossip forum closely following the fallout of Julian's scandal. The thread was entirely dedicated to Chloe. My former sister-in-law tried desperately to salvage her luxury lifestyle brand. She posted a tearful video claiming she was an innocent victim who knew nothing about the stolen money funding her extravagant trips. But the internet is undefeated. Online sleuths dug deep into her history. They exposed her relentless cultural appropriation, highlighting how she consistently stole designs from Black creators without giving credit or compensation. Worse, they tracked public court filings and realized her husband Harrison froze all joint assets during the divorce proceedings. Sponsors who previously funded her blog ran for the hills, wanting absolutely no association with a known fraudster. I scrolled down to the newest post. A user secretly snapped a photo of Chloe just yesterday. She was not lounging in Milan or carrying a fake Birkin bag. She was standing behind the checkout register of a fast fashion retail store at a local suburban mall. She wore a cheap polyester uniform, complete with a plastic name tag, looking completely miserable as she rang up discounted sweaters. She tried to mock my roots, and now she worked a minimum wage shift just to afford a tiny studio apartment. The karma was so precise and poetic I felt a small smile tug at my lips. The soft chime of my door opening pulled me away from the screen. My assistant walked in carrying the morning stack of sorted mail. She set the pile of corporate envelopes on my desk. She mentioned one piece of mail looked unusual but was addressed directly to me. I thanked her, and she quietly exited the room. I sifted through the stack until I found the unusual envelope. It was cheap, thin paper. I looked at the return address. It bore the seal of the county correctional facility. My heart did a slow thump. I picked up my letter opener and sliced through the envelope. I pulled out a single sheet of lined yellow notepad paper. The handwriting was frantic, messy, and instantly recognizable. It was from Julian. I unfolded the paper and flattened it against my mahogany desk. The words were written in blue ink, some of the letters smudged by what looked like dried tears. He was begging. The man who confidently threatened to destroy my brother and steal my company under a fraudulent prenup was now reduced to a pathetic, scrambling prisoner. He wrote that the holding cell was a nightmare, that the food was inedible, and he had no one else to turn to. Harrison completely cut contact, and Eleanor was busy trying to throw him under the bus to save her own skin during plea negotiations. Julian pleaded for my forgiveness, swearing that he had loved me all along. The very last line of the frantic letter was the most pathetic of all. He begged me, the black woman he tried to exploit and humiliate, to deposit a few $100s into his jail commissary account so he could buy soap. I stared at the crumpled yellow notepad paper resting on my immaculate mahogany desk. The sheer audacity of his request practically radiated from the cheap blue ink. Julian had dedicated an entire paragraph to detailing the harsh realities of his new concrete living arrangements, complaining about the thin mattresses and the terrible food. He actually expected me to feel sympathy for the man who had conspired to steal $2 million in my name. I let my eyes scan back up toward the middle of the page, where his handwriting became even more frantic and unhinged. He wrote that he still loved me. He claimed that the entire identity theft scheme was solely his mother doing, completely absolving himself of any personal responsibility. He swore that once he served his time in federal prison, he would come out a changed man. He promised we could start over, rebuild our relationship, and finally have the beautiful life we had planned together. I even dared to use the pet names he used to whisper to me when we were alone, trying to manipulate my emotions from behind steel bars. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no residual heartbreak, no lingering sadness, and certainly no pity. The man I thought I had loved never actually existed. Julian was nothing more than a hollow, desperate parasite who had tried to attach himself to a successful black woman to drain her resources. I did not even bother reading the rest of his pathetic excuses. I picked up the yellow paper by the corner, holding it between my index finger and thumb, as if it were contaminated. I turned my chair slightly toward the heavy-duty paper shredder sitting discreetly next to my filing cabinet. I pressed the power button, and the machine hummed to life with a low, hungry growl. Without a single second of hesitation, I dropped Julian's desperate pleading letter straight into the feed slot. The sharp steel blades caught the cheap paper instantly. I watched with deep, satisfying calmness as his fake apologies, his empty promises of a fresh start, and his pathetic begging for commissary soap were violently chewed up and spit out into tiny, illegible strips of trash. The machine ground to a halt, plunging my office back into a serene, comfortable silence. I turned the shredder off and leaned back into my ergonomic leather chair, feeling lighter than I had in years. I folded my hands in my lap and looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. The city skyline stretched out before me, a testament to ambition and hard work. I allowed myself a long, quiet moment to deeply reflect on the absolute illusion of marrying up. For so long, society had pushed the narrative that a successful, educated black woman needed to find a partner from a prestigious old money background to truly validate her arrival in the upper echelons of society. I had subconsciously bought into that lie. I had looked at Julian Tailored suits, his polished vocabulary, and his supposed aristocratic bloodline, and I had mistakenly believed those things equated to character and stability. I had allowed myself to be impressed by a facade. The truth was entirely different. The old money world Julian and Eleanor represented was entirely morally bankrupt. They hid their racism, their theft, and their profound incompetence behind expensive country club memberships and fake designer handbags. They operated under the delusion that their whiteness and their historical family name gave them the inherent right to exploit anyone they deemed beneath them. They looked down on my family because we did not fit their narrow, bigoted definition of success. Eleanor had the nerve to say my parents smelled like fried grease, treating their lifelong sacrifice like a disgusting flaw. I thought about my parents, Marcus and Helene, and a wave of overwhelming pride washed over my entire spirit. I thought about the bustling, vibrant soul food diner they had built from the ground up on the south side of the city. I remembered the scent of seasoned fried catfish, slow-cooked collard greens, and warm, buttery cornbread that always filled the air. That scent was not a flaw. It was the scent of absolute survival. It was the aroma of relentless black excellence. My parents had worked grueling 14-hour shifts, standing on their feet until their backs ached, just to ensure I could attend the best universities and walk into corporate boardrooms with my head held high. They did not inherit a single dime. They earned every single dollar with clean hands and unshakable dignity. Their greasy diner held infinitely more value, prestige, and honor than Eleanor's crumbling, foreclosed ancestral mansion ever could. My parents possessed a wealth of character that Julian could not even begin to comprehend. They knew the value of community, of honesty, and of generational resilience. I realized that I never needed to marry up into anyone else's world because I was already standing on the shoulders of giants. I belonged to a lineage of kings and queens who turned nothing into empires. The power I held in my hands. The investment firm I had built, the historic estate I had purchased. It was all a direct result of the unyielding strength my parents had poured into my soul since the day I was born. My quiet, empowering reflection was suddenly interrupted by the sharp, ringing tone of my office telephone. The sudden sound pulled me out of my deep thoughts and back into the present moment. I glanced at the caller identification screen on my sleek glass desk. A massive, brilliant smile instantly broke across my face. It was my father. I reached out and picked up the receiver, pressing it to my ear. Before I could even say a single word, his deep, rumbling, joyful voice filled the secure line. He did not call to talk about the past or the toxic people we had left behind in the dirt. He called to talk about our family future. Marcus enthusiastically told me to clear my entire schedule for the upcoming weekend. Hi and my mother were officially hosting a grand ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newest, most luxurious location of their rapidly expanding restaurant franchise, and they needed their brilliant daughter standing right at the very front of the line. I pulled up to the grand opening that Saturday evening, stepping out of my car and immediately feeling the vibrant pulse of the city. The new flagship location of my parents' restaurant franchise was an absolute masterpiece of modern architecture, seamlessly blended with rich cultural heritage. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows showcased a stunning two-story dining room bathed in warm amber light. The line to get inside wrapped around the block. Valets were rushing to park luxury vehicles, while local news vans set up their cameras near the entrance. I walked up the red carpet rolled out over the pristine pavement, greeted by the mouth-watering aroma of slow-roasted meats, savory spices, and sweet buttery pastries that had defined my entire childhood. This was not the small corner diner Eleanor had mocked. This was a premier dining destination situated right in the heart of the city's most lucrative commercial district. I stepped through the heavy oak doors and was instantly enveloped by an atmosphere of undeniable black excellence. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with supportive community members, local politicians wearing sharp suits, and thriving entrepreneurs who had built their own empires from the ground up. Golden jazz music flowed from a live band set up on a raised mahogany stage. Waiters navigated the crowd with trays of elevated Southern cuisine and crystal flutes filled with expensive champagne that my family had actually paid for in full. Everywhere I looked, I saw genuine smiles and heard booming, joyful laughter. I stood near the entrance and allowed myself a moment to draw a sharp contrast between this vibrant reality and the sterile, suffocating world Julian had tried to drag me into. Julian and his mother relied on a hollow, heavily filtered aesthetic to project their supposed superiority. They gathered in silent, stiff country clubs where everyone secretly hated each other, desperately clutching onto maxed-out credit cards and fraudulent loans just to maintain an illusion. Their world was entirely fake, built on stolen money and desperate social climbing. This room, however, was anchored in absolute truth. The wealth circulating through this grand opening was tangible, ethical, and rooted in a community that actively uplifted one another. My parents had transformed their blood, sweat, and tears into a multi-million-dollar enterprise without ever compromising their dignity or changing who they were. Looking around at the radiant, successful people celebrating my family, I felt a deep wave of pity for the pathetic, narrow-minded bigots currently sitting in county jail. They completely missed out on knowing what real power looked like. My mother spotted me from across the room. Helene wore a stunning emerald green gown, her natural hair styled perfectly, radiating the confidence of a woman who owned every single inch of the floor she walked on. She waved me over, guiding me through the sea of guests, who stopped to shake my hand and congratulate me on my recent viral takedown of a corporate fraudster. We reached the front of the stage just as the jazz band brought their song to a smooth close. The crowd fell into an expectant, respectful hush. My father Marcus stepped up to the microphone. He looked incredibly distinguished in his tailored charcoal suit. He did not need to command the room with arrogance or demands. His mere presence demanded respect. He looked out over the crowd, his dark eyes shining with immense gratitude and unshakable pride. We started our journey 30 years ago with one small stove and a dream. My father began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly through the state-of-the-art sound system. We faced redlining, we faced bank rejections, and we faced people who told us our food did not belong in the upscale neighborhoods of this city. But we never folded. We built this franchise by feeding our community with love and integrity. Tonight we open our fifth and largest location. But I did not get up here to talk about my own hard work. My father turned his gaze directly to me. He pointed a steady hand in my direction, instantly shifting the focus of every single person in the room. I got up here to talk about my daughter Maya, he announced, his voice thickening with emotion. While your mother and I were busy building the foundation, Maya went out and learned how to build the skyscrapers. She took the work ethic we gave her and multiplied it 1,000 times over. The financial acumen, the ruthless corporate strategy, and the sheer brilliant strength required to secure the commercial real estate for this exact building came directly from her boutique investment firm. She did not just protect our family from those who tried to tear us down. She elevated our entire legacy. The room erupted into deafening applause. People cheered, raising their champagne glasses high into the air. My mother pulled me into a tight, emotional hug. My father stepped down from the stage and handed me a pair of oversized golden scissors. Together with the flashes of press cameras illuminating our faces, my parents and I sliced through the thick red ribbon stretched across the main dining room. It was the most validating, powerful moment of my entire professional and personal life. I had officially cemented my role as the architect of our generational wealth. The applause eventually transitioned back into lively conversation and celebratory music. I handed the scissors to the general manager and grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I wanted to step outside onto the terrace to catch my breath and soak in the sheer magnitude of the evening. As I turned toward the glass patio doors, a tall, older white man in a sharp navy suit stepped directly into my path. I recognized him instantly. It was Richard Sterling, the billionaire lead investor, who had sat at the VIP table during my disastrous wedding. The man who had caught the flash drive containing Julian embezzled records. I stiffened slightly, my defensive instincts flaring up. I prepared to ask security to escort him off my family property. But before I could speak, Richard held up both his hands in a gesture of complete surrender. Maya, please do not call security, Richard said, his tone lacking any of the corporate arrogance he had displayed weeks ago. He actually looked genuinely humble. I did not come here to cause trouble. I came here to formally and profusely apologize to you. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my posture rigid. Apologize for what exactly, Richard? For doubting you, he admitted, maintaining direct eye contact. For sitting at that table and assuming you were just another naive bride marrying into a wealthy family. I let my own biases blind me to the reality of the situation. You saved my firm from losing millions of dollars to a criminal, and you did it with more tactical brilliance than any corporate lawyer I have ever employed. I was a fool to underestimate you, and I am deeply sorry for how you were treated that night. I studied his face, sensing the absolute sincerity in his apology. He was a ruthless businessman, but he respected power and intelligence above all else. I gave him a slow, measured nod, accepting the apology, but remaining vigilant. Thank you for saying that, I replied smoothly. But I highly doubt you tracked me down at my family restaurant opening just to clear your conscience. A small, impressed smile touched the corners of Richard's mouth. You are entirely correct, Maya. I came here to make you a business offer. My partners and I have severed all ties with Julian former network. We have an influx of capital, and we are looking for a new firm to manage our high-yield venture portfolios. We want you. We want to offer your boutique investment firm a massive, legitimate, and fully autonomous partnership. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. He held it out to me, his eyes gleaming with a new, highly lucrative proposition. We are talking about an initial operational fund of $50 million. And we want you in the driver's seat. I looked down at the thick envelope in Richard's sterling hand, feeling the weight of the moment. $50 million was a staggering amount of capital, the kind of money that could dictate the entire trajectory of a financial firm. In the past, a younger, more eager version of myself might have snatched that envelope and thanked him profusely for the opportunity. But I was no longer that woman. I had just dismantled a fraudulent empire, and I knew exactly what my leverage was worth. I did not reach for the envelope. Instead, I met Richard's gaze with absolute unyielding calm. 50 million is an adequate starting point, Richard, I said, keeping my voice steady over the lively jazz music playing in the background. But if you want my firm to manage your portfolios, we do not operate under the traditional old money rules. I require total undisputed voting autonomy. You supply the capital, but my team makes the final investment decisions. Furthermore, every single dollar of that fund will undergo a rigorous internal audit by my staff before I sign a single contract. I do not touch dirty money, and I will not allow your previous association with Julian embezzlement scheme to infect my ledger. Richard did not flinch. In fact, the faint smile on his face widened into an expression of genuine, profound respect. He slowly lowered the envelope and nodded. I expected nothing less from you, Maya, he replied, his tone laced with admiration. You have complete autonomy. Draft the contracts with your legal team and send them over. We are ready to do business your way. We shook hands right there on the terrace of my family restaurant, sealing a monumental alliance. It was a massive influx of clean, ethical capital, and it provided the exact fuel I needed to execute the next phase of my master plan. Within weeks, the ink on the partnership agreements was dry, and I immediately put that 50 million to work. I did not just expand my existing corporate portfolios. I established an entirely new branch of my investment firm, operating out of a newly acquired floor in my downtown high-rise. This specific branch had one singular, uncompromising mission. We were dedicated exclusively to funding minority-owned businesses and startups. I sat in my boardroom day after day, listening to pitches from brilliant Black entrepreneurs, women of color, and innovators who had been repeatedly turned away by traditional, predominantly white banking institutions. These were people with incredible vision and relentless work ethic. People who reminded me exactly of my parents when they first started their soul food diner. Traditional banks looked at their zip codes and denied them funding. I looked at their business models and signed multi-million-dollar checks. We were no longer begging for a seat at the elite table. I had built a brand new table, and I was pulling up chairs for everyone who looked like me. We were actively shifting the economic landscape of the city, turning systemic financial barriers into dust. The success of my firm was mirrored by the explosive success of my family restaurant franchise, and watching that growth brought me more joy than any corporate acquisition ever could. A few days after securing the partnership with Richard, first walked into the kitchen of our newest flagship location. The heat from the massive industrial stoves washed over me, accompanied by the incredible rich aromas of our generational recipes. Standing at the absolute center of the bustling kitchen, commanding a brigade of 30 professional line cooks, was my younger brother Jamal. I was no longer the frightened college kid that Julian had tried to blackmail. He was the executive culinary director of our entire franchise, and he moved through the kitchen with absolute, undeniable authority. Julian had thought a grainy, non-consensual video from a foolish fraternity party years ago would be enough to destroy my brother. He thought the threat of exposure would force my family to surrender. But Julian underestimated the power of preemptive legal action. The very morning after my ruined wedding, my attorneys marched straight to Jamal University administration and the local authorities. We submitted the full context of the video proving Jamal had been targeted and coerced during a hazing ritual. The university completely cleared his name, issuing a formal apology for the harassment he endured. Julian blackmail material was rendered entirely useless, stripped of all its venom. Jamal spotted me walking into the kitchen and wiped his hands on his pristine white chef apron. He jogged over, wrapping me in a tight, affectionate hug that smelled of roasted spices and hard work. He stepped back, a massive, confident grin on his face. He told me the evening reservations were completely booked out for the next 3 months, and that the local food critics had just awarded our new location 5 stars. He looked at me, his eyes shining with deep, unspoken gratitude. Julian thought he could use my past to control you, Jamal said, his voice dropping to a sincere, quiet register amidst the kitchen chaos. He thought he could break this family. He did not know he was dealing with a sister who breathes fire. I am so proud of you, Maya, and I am proud to be your brother. I squeezed his shoulder, feeling a profound sense of familial triumph. We protected each other. That is what real families do. We do not use each other as leverage. We lift each other up. I left the restaurant that afternoon feeling completely invigorated. My business was thriving, my family was safe and prospering, and the toxic parasites who tried to drain us were currently awaiting trial in federal holding cells. But there was still one final piece of business I needed to attend to. I drove my car out of the city limits, heading toward the affluent, manicured suburbs. I turned down a familiar, long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. I pulled up to the towering wrought iron gates of the historic estate I had purchased through my blind LLC. This was the exact site of my disastrous wedding, the place where Eleanor had screamed racist insults at my parents and face-planted into a $15,000 cake. I parked my car and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. The estate did not look the same. The massive property was currently swarming with dozens of construction crews, landscapers, and architects. I stood on the grand lawn, crossing my arms over my chest, and proudly oversaw the aggressive, beautiful transformation happening right before my eyes. The sprawling green lawns buzzed with the relentless productive energy of heavy machinery and dedicated labor. I walked across the freshly laid stone pathways, listening to the rhythmic hammering and the loud, clear shouts of the construction foreman coordinating the massive renovation. This sprawling property used to be a rigid monument to suffocating old money exclusivity. For decades, it stood as a highly guarded, gated fortress, designed specifically to keep people who looked like me entirely locked out. Julian and his arrogant mother had revered this place because it perfectly represented the restrictive, bigoted history they desperately clung to. But I owned the deed now, and I was actively rewriting that history with every single brick my crew laid down. I hired a massive specialized team of minority contractors and black architects to completely gut the archaic, aristocratic interior. We were currently transforming the sprawling grounds into the city premier event space, but it would not cater to the fake elite who sipped cheap champagne while hiding massive debts. This venue was specifically designed to highlight diverse cultural events, massive community galas, and uncompromising celebrations of Black excellence. I watched a dedicated team of landscapers planting vibrant new botanical gardens, framing a beautifully constructed outdoor amphitheater. It was going to host charity fundraisers, scholarship banquets, and celebrations of minority entrepreneurs who actually built their wealth from the ground up without stealing from anyone. I specifically contracted designers to ensure the structural renovations honored our rich heritage rather than mimicking a stale European aesthetic. The sterile, cold atmosphere Eleanor had loved so much was completely dead. I was breathing vibrant, authentic life back into the very soil of the estate. I continued my walk toward the back of the massive property, heading directly for the expansive stone terrace where the disastrous wedding reception had taken place just weeks ago. A heavy commercial demolition crew was currently hard at work, violently tearing up the custom marble flooring. The loud, aggressive crunch of breaking stone filled the crisp afternoon air, and the sound was absolute music to my ears. I stood there with my arms crossed and watched with immense satisfaction as a massive yellow excavator ripped the ornate white wooden gazebo right out of the ground. That was the exact spot where I had stood in my custom bridal gown, where I had almost tethered my entire financial empire to a desperate parasitic fraud. The heavy iron claw of the excavator smashed through the intricate latticework where Julian had stood sweating and lying through his teeth. The heavy machinery crushed the wooden beams into jagged splinters, tossing them unceremoniously into a massive metal dumpster. Every single physical remnant of that toxic, suffocating memory was being aggressively and violently removed from my property. The custom drapery Eleanor had selected to match her supposedly high-class tastes was stripped from the walls and thrown directly into the trash heap. The ancient suffocating chandeliers were pulled down from the vaulted ceilings and replaced with sleek modern lighting fixtures that radiated warmth and uncompromising clarity. I watched a contractor toss the last broken piece of the wedding gazebo into the dumpster, and I felt a heavy, lingering shadow lift entirely off my shoulders. The space was now completely cleansed of Julian's pathetic, cowardly presence. The vile stench of his family fake pedigree was thoroughly scrubbed from the very walls. The estate was completely mine. I walked away from the noisy demolition zone and stepped inside the quiet main house, heading straight for the sweeping mahogany staircase. I climbed the wide stairs and walked down the freshly painted hallway, entering the luxurious master suite that overlooked the entire back half of the expansive estate. I stepped out onto the wide wraparound stone balcony. The afternoon sun was just beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting brilliant, striking streaks of gold and deep violet across the sky. I walked over to a sleek wrought iron patio table where I had previously left a chilled bottle of imported deep red wine and a single pristine crystal glass. I poured myself a generous measure, listening to the rich, heavy liquid splash against the crystal. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the complex, bold flavors settle on my tongue. I leaned against the heavy stone balustrade, looking out over the dozens of workers currently bringing my ultimate vision to life. A profound, unshakable sense of inner peace washed over my entire spirit. For weeks I had been operating on pure adrenaline, fighting a vicious corporate and personal war against a family that tried to humiliate and exploit me. I had publicly destroyed Julian. I had exposed Eleanor vile racism and her federal financial fraud. I had watched them get hauled away in heavy steel handcuffs. But standing here on the high balcony of a multi-million-dollar estate I owned outright, I realized something incredibly powerful. The ultimate revenge was never just about destroying Julian. Destroying a weak, fraudulent man who could not even manage his own bank accounts was far too easy. It lacked true vision. The absolute ultimate revenge was building an untouchable, impenetrable empire that he could never even dream of accessing. They thought they could use my brilliance to fund their rotting legacy. Instead, their arrogance provided the exact fuel I needed to obliterate them and elevate my own community. I had taken the very weapon they tried to use against me, their supposed wealth and status, and I had entirely conquered it. I was sitting at the absolute pinnacle of success, completely autonomous, and infinitely more powerful than they ever were. The cool evening breeze swept across the high balcony, rustling the green leaves of the ancient oak trees lining the property boundary. I took another slow, satisfying sip of my wine, feeling completely untouchable and utterly free. The sleek glass surface of my smartphone buzzed sharply against the wrought iron patio table. The sudden harsh vibration broke the serene, comfortable silence of the balcony. I set my crystal glass down and picked up the device, swiping my thumb swiftly across the screen to unlock it. A high-priority encrypted email notification popped up on my home screen. It was an official automated alert generated directly from the executive legal department of the private credit union my father managed. I tapped the notification and read the bold black text flashing across the bright screen. The bank had just finalized the ultimate fatal strike against the people who tried to ruin my life. The 30-day eviction notice had officially expired. The email confirmed the immediate legal foreclosure and total physical seizure of Eleanor's sprawling suburban ancestral mansion. The email included a digital attachment. It was a live high-resolution photograph taken by the bank asset seizure team just minutes ago. The image showed heavy steel padlocks, securing the massive wooden front doors of Eleanor's beloved estate, and a glaring neon orange foreclosure notice slapped directly over her brass family crest. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, zooming in on that glaring neon orange foreclosure sticker. The bright, tacky color clashed beautifully against the pretentious brass family crest Eleanor had polished so obsessively for decades. I locked my phone and took a final deep breath of the crisp evening air before heading back inside my own estate. By the time Monday morning rolled around, I was sitting at the head of the polished oak conference table in my downtown office, ready to execute the final stage of my corporate acquisition. My lead legal counsel slid a thick stack of finalized property deeds across the table. The private credit union my father managed had officially transferred the holding rights of Eleanor's seized suburban mansion directly to my investment firm philanthropic branch. I picked up my favorite gold-plated fountain pen and uncapped it. I did not just sign a simple transfer of ownership. I was signing the official municipal authorization for a total uncompromising demolition. The massive sprawling estate with its ridiculous imported columns and sterile manicured hedges was going to be completely leveled to the ground. My firm had already secured the zoning permits to repurpose the entire 5-acre lot. We were fully funding the construction of a state-of-the-art community youth center. It would feature an indoor basketball court, a fully equipped technology lab for aspiring young engineers, an extensive library, and a massive community garden. I signed my name on the dotted line with a sharp, aggressive flourish, legally erasing Eleanor's toxic footprint from the neighborhood map. I handed the signed documents back to my legal team and stood up, walking over to the window. I crossed my arms and allowed myself a long moment of profound, vindicating closure. Eleanor had stood in the middle of my ruined wedding reception, covered in cake frosting, and weaponized this exact property against me. She had screamed that her ancestral mansion held enough equity to destroy my family and drive us into absolute poverty. She tried to use those brick walls as a fortress of white supremacy and old money entitlement, wielding her zip code like a loaded gun. Now that very same property was going to serve the exact community she viciously despised. The young, brilliant black kids from the surrounding working-class neighborhoods would soon be running, playing and learning on the exact same soil where Eleanor used to host her exclusionary, bigoted garden parties. The irony was sweet, potent, and deeply satisfying. I had taken the ultimate symbol of her racial and economic superiority and dismantled it entirely, transforming a monument of hatred into an incubator for future black excellence. Her beloved family legacy was gone forever, replaced by the laughter, safety, and unbridled ambition of the youth she would have crossed the street to avoid. With the business week officially closed, I left my corporate high-rise and drove straight to the heart of the city for our sacred Sunday tradition. I pulled into the driveway of my parents' home, the comfortable, warm brick house where I had learned every valuable lesson about loyalty, respect, and hard work. The moment I unlocked the front door, the rich, incredible aroma of Sunday dinner washed over me, instantly soothing my spirit and grounding my soul. The air was thick with the heavy scent of baked macaroni and cheese, slow-roasted yams, seasoned collard greens, and warm honey-glazed cornbread. I walked into the kitchen and found my brother Jamal standing at the stove. He was wearing an apron over his casual clothes, expertly seasoning a massive pan of fried chicken while bobbing his head to the classic soul music playing from the vintage speakers in the living room. Jamal turned around and flashed me a brilliant, carefree smile, completely unburdened by the malicious blackmail Julian had once held over his head. He was thriving, safe, and deeply respected as the culinary director of our booming family empire. My father, Marcus, was sitting at the kitchen island, laughing loudly at a joke my mother had just made. Helene was setting the large dining room table with our favorite porcelain plates, her eyes bright and completely stress-free. I joined them, pulling up a stool next to my father. He wrapped a strong, warm arm around my shoulders and kissed the side of my head, asking me how my week of dominating the financial sector had been. I looked at the three of them, absorbing the absolute safety and profound connection that filled the room. This was what genuine, unshakable wealth actually looked like. Julian and his family possessed bank accounts and designer clothes, but they were entirely bankrupt when it came to human decency. Their dinner tables were cold, sterile battlegrounds where they constantly manipulated each other, plotted federal crimes, and calculated how to exploit the people around them. Eleanor was willing to throw her own son into a federal prison just to maintain her country club membership. Julian was willing to sell out his own mother the second the police showed up. They had absolutely no loyalty, no warmth, and no soul. Sitting here in my parents' lively, music-filled kitchen, surrounded by people who would willingly jump in front of a moving train for me, I realized I had always been the richest person in any room I walked into. We did not need to fake our prestige. Our bond was forged in the fire of genuine struggle and absolute unconditional love. We ate dinner together, passing serving dishes, sharing stories about our week, and laughing until our stomachs physically hurt. The heavy, dark shadow of Julian deception was completely gone, replaced by the radiant, healing light of my true family. As the evening wound down, and my parents started clearing the plates, I stepped away from the busy dining room. I walked quietly into the living room, standing near the large bay window that looked out onto the quiet, tree-lined street. I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute weight of my journey settle into my bones. The battles were fought, the frauds were exposed, and the empire was secured. I turned my head slowly, looking directly forward at the audience, preparing to deliver my final thoughts on the entire ordeal. I looked directly forward, feeling the immense weight of the past few months finally lift from my shoulders. The journey from that disastrous wedding reception to this moment of absolute clarity had tested every single fiber of my being. But it had also forged me into something entirely unbreakable. I realized that my story was never really about a failed marriage or a fraudulent groom. It was about the dangerous, seductive illusion of proximity to power. For so long, society tells women, especially Black women, that success means gaining access to exclusive rooms. We are taught to soften our edges, lower our voices, and erase our cultural markers just to be tolerated by people who inherited their status. We are conditioned to believe that old money and aristocratic bloodlines hold some inherent, unquestionable superiority. But that is the greatest lie ever sold to us. True power does not require you to shrink yourself. True excellence does not demand that you hide your roots or apologize for the sacrifices of your parents. What Julian and his mother called unrefined, I now recognize as the ultimate manifestation of Black excellence. My parents built a thriving empire from a tiny grease-stained kitchen. They faced systemic barriers, redlining and blatant discrimination, yet they turned every single obstacle into a stepping stone. Their resilience is not something to be hidden behind the swinging doors of a catering kitchen. It is something to be broadcast, celebrated, and revered. Black excellence is not about mimicking the sterile, soulless traditions of people who despise you. It is about taking the raw, authentic elements of your heritage and elevating them into undeniable greatness. When I stood in that grand ballroom and listened to Eleanor mock the scent of my family business, a part of me almost retreated. That is exactly what they want. They want you to feel so embarrassed by your origins that you willingly hand over your hard-earned resources just to buy their toxic approval. They want you to trade your genuine generational dignity for a fake seat at their rotting table. But the moment I refused to play their game, their entire facade crumbled. I stopped trying to fit into their room and simply bought the entire building. That brings me to the most important truth I have learned through this entire ordeal. Never let anyone make you feel small because of where you come from. The people who look down on your roots are usually standing on rotting wood. Julian and Eleanor strutted around with designer clothes and aristocratic titles, but their foundation was entirely eaten away by debt fraud and profound incompetence. They looked down on my family because we worked with our hands, completely blind to the fact that those same hands held the financial power to either save them or destroy them. When you know your own worth, you become immune to the cheap insults of bankrupt people. You realize that your authenticity is your greatest armor. They thought their whiteness and their historical name gave them the inherent right to exploit anyone they deemed beneath them. They were entirely wrong. I walked out of my parents' warm, music-filled house that Sunday evening and headed straight downtown to my corporate headquarters. Now I am standing here in my sleek, high-rise corner office. I am looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows at the sprawling, glittering city skyline. The city lights reflect off the glass, mirroring the bright, limitless potential of the empire I have built. I am no longer the anxious bride trying to appease a racist mother-in-law. I am the sole owner of a highly lucrative investment firm. I am a fierce protector of my family legacy. I am a woman who funds minority entrepreneurs and actively dismantles the systemic barriers designed to keep us out. I walk over to my mahogany desk and gently run my fingers over the polished surface. There are no frantic begging letters from federal inmates cluttering my workspace anymore. There are only multi-million-dollar partnership agreements, blueprints for community youth centers, and strategic plans for aggressive ethical expansion. My bank accounts are thriving, My conscience is entirely clear, and my spirit is completely untethered. Julian is currently sitting in a concrete cell stripped of his tailored suits and his fake prestige. Eleanor is navigating the terrifying reality of the federal justice system without a single dime to her name. Chloe is working a minimum wage retail shift, permanently exiled from the luxury lifestyle she tried to fund with stolen money. They tried to use my brilliance to secure their fraudulent future, but they ended up paying for their absolute arrogance with their freedom. Meanwhile, I am standing at the absolute pinnacle of my industry. I am unbothered, wealthy, and entirely free. I do not have to compromise my identity, my family, or my peace of mind for anyone. I have secured generational wealth that cannot be seized, stolen, or diminished by entitled frauds. I took a moment of profound public humiliation and turned it directly into the ultimate undeniable catalyst for my complete financial and personal liberation, proving that true power can never be stolen. I took the absolute worst day of my life and transformed it into the greatest, most deeply satisfying victory my family has ever seen. The legacy I am leaving behind today will permanently ensure that no one in my bloodline ever has to stand by the kitchen doors again, constantly waiting for an invitation. We own the building, we own the tables, and we absolutely control the entire narrative for all the generations to come after us. Have you ever had to bravely stand up to protect your beautiful family from fake entitled people? How did you put them in their rightful place? Please tell me your story in the comments below, and definitely do not forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more stories of sweet absolute karma. Maya's remarkable journey teaches us a profoundly empowering lesson about the dangerous illusion of proximity to power. Society often pressures successful women, especially women of color, to shrink their identities just to fit into so-called elite spaces. We are frequently conditioned to believe that old money titles and historic pedigrees automatically equate to inherent superiority. However, as Maya brilliantly discovered on her wedding day, those who look down on your cultural roots are almost always standing on rotting wood. The ultimate takeaway is that true wealth cannot be measured by designer handbags, exclusive country club memberships, or aristocratic zip codes. Real prestige is built upon a solid foundation of unyielding integrity, tireless hard work, and unconditional family love, the exact values that Marcus and Helene instilled in their daughter. Maya realized that she never needed to beg for a seat at a toxic exclusionary table. She already possessed the financial brilliance and inner strength to completely buy the building. Furthermore, this narrative serves as an absolute masterclass in setting uncompromising boundaries. When faced with entitled, manipulative individuals who attempt to exploit your hard-earned success to mask their own failures, the most powerful response is to stand firmly in your truth. You must ruthlessly protect your peace, your assets, and your family's legacy from parasites. Maya's triumphant revenge was not merely about exposing desperate corporate criminals to the authorities. It was a beautiful celebration of unapologetic Black excellence and generational dignity. She proved that you should never apologize for the sacrifices of those who lovingly raised you. Take control of your own narrative today. Stand tall in your authenticity, ruthlessly protect your boundaries, and never let anyone make you feel small. Please like, subscribe, and share this story to empower others to recognize their true, unshakable worth.